Okay, good morning, everybody. Very warm welcome to this session this morning, a regional dialogue on our COVID response in Europe and Central Asia. My name is Catherine Taylor. I work for FAO in the Resource Mobilization and Private Sector Division, and it's my pleasure to moderate today's session. I know many of you are joining from different time zones, so welcome to you all at whatever time of day. And just to talk you initially through the agenda. So this meeting, this online Zoom session is shaped as a dialogue in order to really spark greater joint action on COVID. We all feel COVID very close to us and it's a huge challenge. But this session will really zoom in on issues in Europe and Central Asia. And our meeting today will inform you what's going on vis-a-vis FAO's response in the region. We will consult with you and our partners and ministers from countries in the regions, and really we want to discuss with you on how to mount greater joint action at all levels, in particular country level. So let me just give you a little bit of the flow of today so you know where we're going. But first of all, we'll hear from FAO, from our Deputy Director General, Ms. Beth Bechtel, who will give us an overview of FAO's role and work globally, as well as in the region. And then we'll zoom in to the region itself with Mr. Vladimir Rachmanin. Thank you, the regional representative who will give a keynote speak. We will also hear from key partners, and I'll introduce them shortly. And then we'll move to a ministerial panel discussion, actually hearing from the sub-regions and how to prevent this health crisis from becoming a food crisis. We'll then reconvene and look at FAO's response, going deeper into regional specificities. We'll actually have a video from farmers themselves. And last but not least, discuss with you and key partners on how we can really accelerate joint action. So needless to say, this is the beginning of a dialogue, and our hope is that we can follow up with each of you as partners thereafter and keep going, as many of you are already working with us. Okay, so before we move into the meat of the day, let me just tell you a few what I call Zoom keeping rules and regulations, if you like. Those who are participants, you will find yourselves muted. You don't have your videos on, but should there be an opportunity, the people behind the scenes can video and unmute you, but the panelists all have videos and are able to mute and unmute. However, to really engage with you, there is a chat box. We ask you to post issues there, but also use very specifically the Q&A box. You'll see that at the bottom of the screen. That's where you can write your live questions, and we have people live answering those as we go along. Interpretation is available in English and Russian. We thank our interpreters who do a sterling job behind the scenes, so you can click the button there. And here in the chat, I believe we're going to post some other bits and pieces for you to look at on general housekeeping arrangements. Okay, so just to say, time is always a major constraint. So my role today is to help us all keep time. So please bear with me so we all add to the rich discussion and let everybody bring their perspectives. So with no further ado, let me hand over to Ms. Beth Bechtel, our Deputy Director General, and then followed by Mr. Vladimir Rachmanin, the regional representative. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Katrin, for setting the stage for us and for being our moderator and MC today. Excellencies, dear ministers, ladies and gentlemen, and colleagues, it is my true pleasure to open this regional dialogue on FAO's COVID-19 response and recovery program. This is the third such event we have held, having already met with our colleagues and partners in Africa and also the Near East regions. Let me also begin by just extending my sincere thanks to the entire regional office for Europe and Central Asia under Vladimir's leadership for organizing and hosting this event. I'm pleased that you'll get to see and hear from many of them throughout the course of the session. The Europe and Central Asia region, I think, as you all well appreciate, is quite heterogeneous in terms of the country's economic structure, the rate of economic growth and transition, geographic position, climate conditions, and also various socio-demographic features. But agriculture is undeniably a key sector of the economy in the region, with most countries dominated by smallholder and family farms as significant contributors to employment and agri-food production. The agri-food sector itself is a major generator of employment and income, especially for women and youth, and contributes to food security and nutrition along the entire value chain, from processing to transforming and distributing to marketing. Key issues for assistance in the region are included in this programmatic umbrella of the regional initiatives. These cover support of smallholders, food systems transformation, natural resource management in a changing climate, and also addressing food insecurity and addressing all forms of malnutrition across all the programs. This is also related to cross-sectoral issues such as gender mainstreaming and statistics, governance, climate change, and nutrition. The programmatic support in this context is provided with the 3 key regional initiatives in the region. The regional initiatives were identified before COVID-19 invaded our lives. But as you will see, COVID-19 has validated for us these priorities and also highlighted the need to address particularly some very specific issues with them. Indeed, COVID-19 has exacerbated the systemic risks in which the region finds itself. The latest economic projections show a degradation of the overall economic situation in 2020, far worse than initially foreseen, with only a partial recovery expected in 2021. As we now move towards the end of 2020, there is still a lot of uncertainty about the months to come. In the region, the pandemic has translated into a series of economic hits. Let me mention just a few. In the early stages of lockdown, food supply chain operators were affected by problems of input availability, including labor, transportation, storage, sales, and cash flows. These problems were particularly severe in livestock, including fish and aquaculture, fruits and vegetables, grains, pulses, and also for potato growers. In addition, cross-border trade was of special concern for food operators in those early days of the pandemic. Tightened food safety controls were imposed by some importing countries and resulted in temporary losses for a number of export-oriented farmers, such as lamb growers in the Western Balkans and greenhouse fruit and vegetable growers in Armenia. There were also disruptions of domestic markets that had an impact on food producers, notably of high value and perishable products like vegetables and meat. As soon as COVID-19 struck, we at FAO began to develop a response and recovery plan. This plan, I can assure you, was developed through a highly inclusive consultation with country, sub-regional, and regional offices to assess, importantly, the situation on the ground and to identify concrete needs and demands, and also was done through engagement with governments, with national institutions, with our development partners, and other key actors. This plan needed to be everyone's plan, and not just FAO's. It is subject here internally to constant dialogue, internally with our own colleagues, but also with private sector enterprises from across the value chain. And I hope that you would agree, it is based squarely on FAO's own capacity to respond and where these priorities add value to the ongoing work. The plan has 7 priorities. First is our ongoing global humanitarian response to COVID. This ensures that we address the impacts of COVID in the immediate term and safeguard livelihoods in these food crisis contexts that we find ourselves. The remaining include 6 other priorities that we recognize will be very critical to ensure that there is medium and longer term development priorities that allow countries in this region and others to build back better. These include data for decision making. We must ensure that there is quality data and analysis for effective policy support to food systems and to ultimately achieving zero hunger. The third global priority area is poverty reduction, economic inclusion, and social protections. We need to ensure that our COVID-19 responses have a very inclusive post-pandemic economic recovery plan. Next is trade and food safety standards. We must facilitate and accelerate food and agricultural trade during COVID-19 and obviously beyond. Fifth, boosting smallholders' resilience for recovery. Protecting the most vulnerable, promoting economic recovery, and enhancing risk management capacities is a priority. We must also work to prevent the next zoonotic pandemic, and by doing that, ensure that we strengthen and extend the One Health approach to avert animal origin pandemics. And finally, as always important, is food systems transformation, the building back better during this response and recovery. Implementing this plan and building back better will require that we work together on 5 major pillars. These are policies that enable change at scale, institutions that provide the right foundations, third, collective action with countries building common solutions, fourth, investments and innovation with a central role for the private sector, and fifth, partnership and global solidarity. But we know that these global priorities will resonate differently from one region to another. So we have asked our regional offices to regionalize these plans. In the Europe and Central Asia region, 6 of the 7 global priorities have already been translated into 10 programmatic proposals that have been identified through consultations at the regional and country levels. These have included senior officials, experts, academics, private sector and civil society representatives, and others. In the case of the region, the Global Humanitarian Response Plan, item number 1 on the slide, has not been adopted, as luckily, most of the countries in this region are not in need of that same humanitarian emergency style response. My colleague Raimund Yeli, FAO's regional program leader at our regional office in Budapest, will present later and in more detail the FAO COVID-19 response and recovery plan as it has been tailored for the Europe and Central Asia region. Finally, I would just share with you that another exciting endeavor is also beginning to take shape around this COVID-19 response and recovery. We are seeing an opportunity to work with member countries and other partners to bring a food coalition together. This multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral mechanism would support the activation of this global response and recovery program. It would work with us to mobilize resources, expertise, and innovation, and ultimately create a network of networks that lets us be much more intentional, strategic, and directional in bringing experts, knowledge, and ultimately resources to these very important on-the-ground, project-oriented needs that we are identifying. It would serve as an advocate for our overall shared COVID-19 response, and also promote dialogue and bring an exchange of knowledge and expertise in all of these global priority areas that we have discussed. Over 40 countries have expressed interest already in being active partners, and FAO continues to put final details together around this coalition so that it can be operationalized and ultimately become a very important global activity. Let me close here with maybe, Katrin, a few questions that can guide the discussion and the engagement today by all of the meeting's participants, and I hope will trigger some dialogue. We want to know, and first of all, this point is not necessarily listed on the slide, but I think it should be an important guiding force for the discussion. We want to know whether you agree with the 7 proposed priorities under this response and recovery plan. In which one would you put more emphasis? Which ones do you think should be of highest priority? We also, though, need to know who should do what. As we have said, partnership is key. And so, what is the role of governments? What is the role of FAO, of our development partners, of the private sector, of civil society, and also of farmer organizations? And finally, and most importantly to today's conversation, how can the countries of this region work better together to implement this very critical agenda? I am looking forward to the discussion with the ministers, the other panelists, and all of the region's partners during this event. And thank you very much for the opportunity to open this very important conversation. Back over to you, Katrin.
Thank you so much, Beth, and a great perspective and overview on the complexities of our agri-food systems and the shock that it's facing with COVID. So may I promptly hand over now to Vladimir Rachmanin. Thank you very much, and looking forward to your opening speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katrin. Дорогие друзья, коллеги, dear colleagues, friends, it's really a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Beth, for such a thoughtful introduction to the topic. Of course, you know that our today's meeting is the follow-up to what has been organized in the headquarters still in July, and there was a lot of work being done in the headquarters and in the region in order to prioritize and to identify the areas of our FAO work during COVID-19. Of course, the whole pandemic was an extraordinary event and environment for all of us. The purpose of today's meeting is to discuss with all of you what we can do together. How can we improve the situation in agriculture, use this difficult opportunity to look strategically in the region of Europe and Central Asia. We need to be strategic again, because we have a lot of discussions when the crisis started. We focus first in our work on support to the most vulnerable. We try to address the issues immediately, finding the ways in a pragmatic way how to support the countries. Speaking generally, the food systems in the region showed a lot of flexibility, and food availability has not been compromised. That was the result of our conversation with everybody. But there are a lot of stresses and damages during this pandemic, which we need to address and to find the ways to deal with them. What we present to you today is the result of our consultations with the governments, with civil society, with private sector, but we want to enhance this dialogue and continue it. What we learned from our countries, from our preliminary discussions, that among these 6 priority areas, a lot in the region was paid attention to is trade and food system transformations. All others are also important, but these issues are specifically raised by most of the partners. Katrin, I'm sorry, maybe I'm stealing a little bit from your transcript, but I want to share my appreciation of the colleagues who are joining us today. We have the representative of FAO, strong partner globally and regionally, the member of FAO, European Union, European Commission, to share their views with us. We also have a good friend of ours, Armen Anatolyevich Arutyunyan, who will be speaking on behalf of Eurasian Economic Commission, which is an observer, but unites 5 countries in the region of the former Soviet Union. I'm also very happy to see joining us our German colleague, Susan Schleck, who is speaking for her country, but also for EU presidency at the moment. Of course, in the region, we are working with other UN agencies, and it is very important for us to join forces to avoid duplication in order to assist the countries in the best possible ways. And I'm pleased to see joining us Ms. Son, who has just been recently appointed the Regional Director for Europe and Central Asia for UN UN Decentralized Offices Coordination. So we also have a very important representative of European Parliament to share with us the views. So it's all in the further sessions, we have the representatives of the governments, of civil society, of private sector to brainstorm together. I'm also pleased that my colleagues from FAO, Beth Bechtel, started the discussion, but in the later session, we shall have Chief Economist Maximo Tarrera, who is working tirelessly on analyzing the situation, providing policy advice to the countries. We shall have Director of our Investment Office, Alex Jones, who is running the whole issue. And of course, Raymond Yeli, who has already been mentioned and will be mentioned a number of times today, who is leading COVID-19 task force in the region. So we have only 3 hours for all these discussions. I hope we will use it wisely, but the main purpose of the whole is how can we unite our forces, prioritize, and move forward. I'll stop here, so not to, again, not to duplicate. I'll stop here, but I will reserve the right to have a few words in the end after listening to all of you and trying to make up my thoughts at the end of the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You certainly have the right, and we will give you that. And thank you also for preempting introductions. I'm sure you will pronounce names, or you will have pronounced names better than I. But let me introduce the first of 4 speakers. And again, a very warm welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. I invite Ms. Gui Yobsong, the Regional Director for Europe and Central Asia from the UN Development Coordination Office. So handing over to you first. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning and good afternoon, depending where you are. First and foremost, I would like to thank you for inviting me to this timely dialogue to address the challenges posed by the pandemic in the food and agriculture sector. No doubt that the COVID-19 pandemic is one of the greatest global shocks in this century. It recognizes no borders and is unprecedentedly affecting the whole world, from the north to the south and from the east to the west. The COVID-19 pandemic has hit the global economy hard, the worst since the Great Depression of the 1930s. Its wide-reaching impacts on all parts of society, including reduced livelihoods and disrupted food system, are felt intensely across the globe, as well as in Europe and Central Asia, and in particular, the landlocked countries of Central Asia with the upended trade, transport, and distribution. I thought hard about what my key messages should be in today's dialogue. I am surrounded by food security experts who will present the impact of COVID on food security and the actions that need to be undertaken. What I would therefore like to focus on is, firstly, how the United Nations country team in the region has worked collectively in assessing the socioeconomic assessment of COVID and developing action plans to support the governments. What the UN family on the ground has been doing is to assist the government to build back better, to overcome this challenging period, so that the socioeconomic fabric can be more resilient to future shocks and create a better future and hope for the generation to come. I cannot underscore enough the importance of FAO in ensuring food availability, accessibility, utilization, and distribution in such a way that the furthest left behind receives timely support. FAO is a crucial player in safeguarding the food security system during this unprecedented time to ensure everyone has enough nutritious food to eat. FAO is a catalytic player in assisting the government in policy development, like setting food safety standards, so that the agricultural sector can create green jobs, bring greater income to farmers, particularly women farmers, and help revitalize the overall economy while adjusting to the impact of climate change. Secondly, our resident coordinators, as leaders and the Secretary General's representatives in country, are working to harness the best assets of each UN partner to operationalize the action plan. In this regard, they have embraced FAO's comparative advantage on food security and accompanied expertise, ensuring that together with others, the UN system contributes in supporting the government to attain the SDGs. The RCs ensure that the UN is larger than some of its parts, and that together, collectively, through coherence and coordination, the UN contributes to supporting the government to make the necessary leapfrog in its progress to meet the Agenda 2030. In this regard, I'm grateful for FAO's contribution as a specialized agency, but also as a team player. Finally, as we embrace the decade of action, this is time for action, not just words. Together, we need to address risks and vulnerabilities of the most vulnerable. With solidarity, together with the government, United Nations, IFIs, donors, and other partners, we will not only overcome the effects of this pandemic, but build back better and build a brighter future for the youth and the next generations. With the unity, we will be stronger and resilient to any future shocks. Please empower the resident coordinator in the system and enable the UN country team to better support the government. This can only be done when there is a genuine mutual partnership. I'm grateful to FAO for having given me this opportunity to speak, and look forward to listening to the rest of the dialogue. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for bringing that very important one UN perspective in line with the UN reforms, working as one. Okay, so now I hand over to Mr. Arman Harutyungnang, and he is from the Eurasian Economic Commission, designated as representative of the member of the board and minister in charge of industry and agro-industrial complex. Big warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Catherine. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, I'm delighted to join the webinar today and provide remarks on behalf of the Eurasian Economic Commission. Most countries associate this year with a new type of crisis, pandemic that started with fear, followed by uncertainty and leading to economic turmoil. The crisis also hits our food system. It revealed some fragility and vulnerability, and disruptions at production, harvesting, and supply chain levels. While it's important to ensure food security in crisis time, we also need to look into the future and think about tools and mechanisms that will help us to build more resilient and sustainable food system, capable of providing safe and sufficient food for all. Member countries of the Eurasian Economic Union have managed the crisis properly, and no member state had any serious issue with food supplies to its population. However, all member states recognize the importance of investing into more resilient food systems and improve domestic, but also regional food security. In this context, we're working on designing a sustainable food system development agenda and working plan that will address the such issues and the longer-term strategic perspective. We will continue our efforts to strengthen food systems that can guarantee food security for all member states. We believe that Eurasian Economic Union has huge potential of increasing production of several agriculture commodities and products that will contribute to global food security as well. Member states have necessary resources to do this, and very positive dynamics of last years have been very encouraging. During recent years, member states of Eurasian Economic Union have been demonstrating exceptional results in production of wheat and grains, meat, dairy industries, and will be continuing to work on strengthening processing industry and investing in food, fruit, berry, and vegetable production. These measures will help us to ensure economic inclusion, improve social protection, and reduce poverty. Now, I'd like to take a few minutes to reflect on the FAO proposed regional response and inclusive recovery plan, in particular speaking about digital technologies and trade. I think everyone agrees that data has become a powerful source that fueling economic development, and agriculture and food systems are not exception. Application of digital technologies in agriculture can help us to increase productivity, efficiency, resilience, and sustainability of the sector. Digital farming means collecting data from satellite up to IoT on the ground, use machine learning algorithm to analyze data and manage farm based on these analytics. Furthermore, at a larger farm level, data can be transformed and processed by smart machines, which is example of autonomous farming. Such technique is important in crisis we observed with the COVID-19, when people were unable to cultivate their land and organize harvest. We need to help farmers to minimize labor-intensive tasks and help them to earn decent profits. More data means better access to funding and agriculture insurance, more targeted government support measures based on individual and group needs of farmers. We have several startups in the member countries of Eurasian Economic Union and Eurasian Economic Commission in close cooperation with member states will be working together on identifying such technologies and designing mechanisms of adaptation. Another important area is trade and traceability. We all have benefited from a liberalization of trade, which helped companies to sell their products all around the world. However, complexity of the system also resulted in several issues such as food safety, food fraud, and more importantly, trust among major stakeholders. One of the potential solutions is application of decentralized technologies such as blockchain. It can help to address the issue of trust through decentralization and anonymous validation of transactions. Moreover, further integration of IoT can help us track information flow that is autonomously collected and transferring data among all major stakeholders in the system. In other words, the convergence of big data and adaptation of blockchain technology can help us to build more efficient and transparent trade arrangements. Blockchain can also help us to improve prevention of zoonotic pandemic via application of permission blockchain technology. Finally, we will continue to work on food system transformation by adopting new technologies, developing human capital, and investing into new areas such as food loss and waste management and urban farming. I would like to express our gratitude to Mr. Vladimir Rahmanin for outstanding cooperation and thank to Raymond Yell for his regular professional support to the member states. We're ready to discuss implementation of some of the points in the near future. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for the Eurasian perspective and also highlighting the importance of digitalization, where certainly COVID has made us leapfrog in that area. And now may I welcome Mr. Michael Rupp, the Principal Administrator, DG Neighbourhood and Enlargement Negotiation, Eastern Partnership from the European Commission. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the organizers for this very timely and important conference. I'm grateful for the invitation to outline the EU's response to the COVID-19 crisis regarding the Eastern Neighborhood and the Western Balkans and Turkey. I fully support previous speakers in their statements that this is an important topic that we need to discuss. As Commission President von der Leyen has stated, on health and socioeconomic recovery, the Commission's aim is to protect the lives and livelihoods of people, including in the region surrounding the EU, which for us is the Western Balkans and Turkey, as well as the Southern Neighborhood, and for this forum important, of course, also the Eastern Neighborhood. This for the EU are the 6 countries, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Moldova, Georgia, and the Ukraine, for those who are not always familiar with our EU speak. The EU's global response to the COVID-19 crisis has been coordinated under the so-called Team Europe approach, which brings together member states, IFIs, and others. We have 3 clusters under which we are working. The first cluster is emergency response to the immediate health crisis and the resulting humanitarian needs. The second cluster is looking at improving health, research, and water. And the third cluster is addressing the social and economic consequences. And already some previous speakers have alluded to them. The Team Europe approach provides a single framework for action of all European actors, including the Commission, international financial institutions, in particular the European Investment Bank and the EBRD, European development finance institutions, member states development agencies, and technical assistance providers. So what did we do? Early on, the Commission was aware that the pandemic will aggravate already existing humanitarian needs, and the pandemic impacts, in our view, of course, populations already affected by humanitarian crises and conflicts, such as migrants, refugees, internally displaced persons, as well as women, children, elderly, and disabled people of minorities. Under all these priorities, the EU has reoriented significant numbers of ongoing activities to provide a clear and targeted response to COVID-19. Ongoing as well as planned operations were adapted, sped up, accelerated. We provided additional support to the World Health Organization to enhance their pandemic responses. And so far, overall, we have made available over 1 billion euros for the clusters 1 and 2 in the neighborhood south, 89 million to the neighborhood east, 112 million to the Western Balkans and Turkey. The Commission is also committed to a multilateral approach to the provision of vaccines, which is the medium-term planning, of course. And part of this support goes to the COVAX facility, which is operated by the Gavi Initiative, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovations, and the WHO, because we want to make sure that when a vaccine is available, this can be rolled out throughout our neighborhood regions. Many countries in the Western Balkans and in the neighborhood have already expressed an interest to join this facility to secure access to vaccines at a good negotiated price. And the EU support also includes, of course, life-saving medical equipment for intensive care, hospital beds, fully equipped ambulance cars, hundreds of respirators, digital mobile X-rays, tens of thousands of testing kits, and personal protective equipment. Maybe just focusing on the different regions we're discussing today, regarding the Western Balkans, already in March 2020, the EU has mobilized funds for immediate support to the health sector, which amounted to 38 million. This has grown now considerably since then to over 70 million in clusters 1 and 2. On a regional level, this includes regional support to vulnerable groups of immigrants and migrants, which is worth 8 million. And of course, we also put together with the WHO also support to ECDC. This is not the rock musicians, but the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control. And just as an example, the support to Montenegro, for example, includes 3 million of reoriented programs for addressing immediate health crisis and 9.5 million euros for the health systems. The EU treats the Western Balkans as privileged partners, and we have here also included them in a joint procurement mechanism since April. Regarding Turkey, amongst the first measures was the activation of 4.7 million contingency to provide equipment and consumables, 4 million gloves, 4 million masks, 100,000 of protective gowns for healthcare workers. I could go on and quoting numbers, but let's look at the Eastern Partnership, so the 6 countries that I mentioned. Here in April, the EU mobilized an emergency support package worth more than 30 million for immediate needs in the health sector. In July, the amount of allocation directed towards cluster 1 and 2 increased to 89 million for these areas. The EU is delivering over 11 million personal protective equipment items, medical equipment supplies, and so on. I could go through all the different numbers for the Ukraine, for Georgia, but basically we see a substantial rolling out of supplies, including of course, a lot through the WHO. I will leave it here, not going through all the thousands of numbers that I could quote, but let me just briefly look at the other side of the coin and close with this, because time is flying. The cluster 3, the socioeconomic consequences, the medium and long-term socioeconomic consequences are important. And here, to create a more resilient society throughout the Eastern neighborhood and throughout the neighborhood of the European Union, including the Western Balkans, we have started to support public health policy reforms, provided together with the EIB loans to the public sector, notably for healthcare equipment and supplies in the medium and long term. And here, of course, we're talking overall now, when we look at all the clusters, of over 4.3 billion euros of support, when we look at all the neighboring regions, including East, South, Western Balkans, and Turkey. And this is to give you an overview. I'm sure in later discussions, a lot of issues will be discussed related to this. But I think at this moment in time, I want to underline for the European Commission, we are helping all our neighboring regions, and we are trying to minimize the impact of this pandemic in the short, in the medium, and also in the long term. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Michael Rupp. Very impressive figures to catalyze action, both in the short term and longer term. From a team approach, which is a really great concept to think about. Okay, so we now hear from Mr. Norbert Linz. He's from the European Parliament and chair of the European Parliament Committee on Agriculture and Rural Development, and a member of the European Parliamentary Alliance Against Hunger and Malnutrition. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you, Mr. Linz.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mrs. Taylor. Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the invitation to this important debate today on joint action for our food and agricultural sector after or better during COVID-19. The opening was already super interesting to get the input of the broader region. So please let me allow to share with you, as chair of the European Parliament's Committee for Agriculture and Rural Development, some views on how the EU food chain has been affected by the crisis, what lessons we can learn from this, and how our policy agenda might be impacted in the coming months. To start on a positive note, I believe that with hindsight, EU agriculture has suffered relatively less damage compared to other parts of the economy under the lockdown measures. With no concerns of food shortage, I think therefore that there are no denying that the EU food chain has proved very resilient to challenges of historical magnitude and has adapted very well to new circumstances, including logistical disruptions and a rapidly evolving demand. That said, there have been, however, specific impacts, and certain agricultural sectors have been hit more severely than others. You know that the Agri Committee of the European Parliament has been working hard to make the voice of the affected sectors heard. In this respect, I think that we have been instrumental in improving the successive aid packages approved in the last months. In doing so, we could, to some extent, elevate the financial and market pressure on our wine, cheese, meat, fruit, and vegetable producers, to name only a few. Let me just name, for example, the special aid for private storage for dairy, or the postponement of the organic regulation. But this is not over yet, and as the last COVID-19 outbreaks this fall point to possible reintroduction of lockdowns measures, we have to prepare for new market disruptions. Against this background, I think, therefore, that we already need to draw some preliminary lessons from the pandemic to better prepare for the future. I would like to make 3 points here. First, I believe that the COVID-19 outbreak and its dramatic consequences have cast a fresh light on the importance of maintaining resilient food supply chains and the strategic importance of food sovereignty for the EU. Despite the fact that the EU is a net food exporter, our food security remains fragile. All sectors are over-reliant on global trading relations and long supply chains. We still import, for example, thousands of tons of animal feed from North and South America and are dependent on foreign suppliers for inputs. Second, we need to take stock of these weaknesses and use this crisis as an opportunity to improve the social acceptance of agriculture. I think that there is no escaping a reflection on the rebalancing of our supply chains and food production at local level. The EP recently commissioned a study on the impact of the COVID-19 on agricultural markets and the EU food chain. And I'm confident that this will help us to get the full picture early next year. Finally, and from a more financial perspective, I believe that another important lesson from the crisis to be learned as policymakers is that for an EU-wide crisis that affects all agriculture sectors, the EU budget will never be able to cope on its own. For this reason, we have to expect member states' initiatives to play a role, perhaps even the major role in providing income assistance to farmers. This was the rationale behind the temporary framework for state aid measures introduced in response to the COVID-19 outbreak in March. Of course, these are just preliminary remarks on the lessons to be learned from the pandemic, and we haven't yet seen it all. In the meantime, I think that we have to keep in mind these elements when we deal with our legislative and policy agenda in the coming months, either in the discussion on the future CAP or in the implementation of the Farm to Fork and the biodiversity strategies. Dear colleagues, you will agree, of course, that this will not be easy, as the COVID-19 pandemic strikes at a sensitive moment, just when a reduced CAP budget collides with the greater environmental and climate ambition envisaged in the CAP post-2020, and the goals for the green transition set out in the Farm to Fork and the biodiversity strategy, which all require additional financing. I thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. In fact, you paint a good picture moving into our next session, where we'll start by watching a video from the field, from farmers, smallholders, talking about the COVID-19 situation. And I have to say that this is a short video. It's a bit raw because it was taken under the constraints of lockdown, which I'm sure you'll appreciate. But I think what it brings home is that small farmers and a wide variety of actors across the whole food system are working hard to overcome challenges, to make sure we all have food on the table. And in many ways, these are our local heroes. So over to the video. Thanks very much. It's a short 10-minute video, I believe.
Без сельского хозяйства никак ничего не получается. Если бы люди не работали, если бы не сажали, это крах. И голод был. Хуже пандемия был. Я живем в Ахалкалаге, в Джавахете. У нас работает, я работаю, жена работает. Очень трудно, не то что в этом районе, во всем Грузии. Трудно что-нибудь новое внести в сельское хозяйство. Привезли новые семена, это самое главное, чтобы люди своими глазами посмотрели. Сейчас у нас не 11-15 сортов нового картофеля. Будем учить фермеров, как сделать, чтобы много урожая снять, чтобы себестоимость меньше была, выгода была, чтобы люди здесь остались, никуда не уехали. Эта пандемия COVID-19 на всех повлияла, и на бизнес, и на людях. Очень большие трудности были насчет и транспортировки, насчет колебания курса валюты.
Наше фермерское хозяйство осуществляет свою деятельность в сфере садоводства. Это является основным моим источником дохода. У нас на сегодняшний день деревья посажены на 18 гектарах. В прошлом году нам еще в период оптимизации добавили земли, которые неэффективно использовались. Ломаем старый сад и, думаю, весной или этой осенью мы посадим там новые сорта, хотим посадить груш. Скорее всего, косвенно все-таки это повлияло на наши доходы, потому что из-за того, что мы своевременно не смогли провести мероприятие, когда начались весенние заморозки, это всего лишь один день был, у нас очень хорошо расцвели деревья, то есть мы ожидали очень большой урожай. Но в связи с тем, что один день был заморозки, то есть минус, мы не смогли провести эти мероприятия, потеряли, может быть, порядка 80% урожая из-за заморозков. В период пандемии многие испытывают трудности с доступом к финансовым ресурсам. К сожалению, у нас вот сейчас кредиты очень дорогие, процентные ставки по кредитам, то есть ставка финансирования, во всяком случае, для садоводства, когда ты 3-4 года не получаешь прибыль, ты вынужден все время вкладывать. И вдруг у тебя может не хватить финансов. В это время очень важно, я считаю, поддержать сельское хозяйство и как-то им дать не, допустим, льготные кредиты, а может быть беспроцентные займы. Это очень помогло бы сельскому хозяйству.
Я занимаюсь биологическим садоводством. Мы выращиваем биологически чистые продукции, фрукты именно. Мы должны были вот эти уже сады все уже обработать, когда только в феврале месяце уже, в конце февраля мы уже, у нас вообще не бывает ни зимы, ничего. Мы должны постоянно работать над этим, чтобы получить какой-то результат. Мы должны были обработать, почву обработать деревья, чтобы не было вредителей, и уже подготовить почву. Мы ничего не успели, мы не могли вот эти препараты вести. Если проблема опять, и мы не можем вовремя провести агротехническую технологию, провести обработку вот этих деревьев, обработку, сажать. Это сажать мы должны уже, вот зимой, уже в феврале месяце мы должны сажать, обрезку делать. Это все, если закроют, это все, это сельское хозяйство пропадет. Я вот боюсь из-за того, что если так закроют нас, у нас будет опять так же, это будет хуже. Поэтому я сейчас надеюсь, что у нас этого не будет, и я буду продолжать вот этот биологический именно препаратом заниматься. Вовремя, если я сделаю, я должна даже это сделать все, чтобы быть выше, закрыть вот это все наши расходы и выйти на внешний рынок. Не то, что внутренний, а внешний. И чтобы я считаю, что правительство вот должно учесть вот наши вот эти все работу сельского хозяйства нельзя останавливать. Это как вот хлеб выращивают, ее же тоже нельзя остановить. Людей нужно кормить. И наши продукции, вот именно Узбекистан, это самое сладкое, все это весь мир еще не знает, но ближнее зарубежье это все знает. Но если нам дадут такую возможность и помогут нам рекламировать нашу продукцию, выйти на внешний рынок, я думаю, Узбекистан узнает весь мир.
Фамилиарно наклонът на земјоделието и, како да речам, главна причина ми е земјоделието да го работам и од него живеем. Произведуваме пченка и пченица. Најпоќе до 50 хектари, 40-50, некогаш на 30 слегаме зависност од површината, како е изајмувањето од други собственици. Имавме затворени граници, производот, имавме расипан производ, немавме пласман беше затворен. Груба пресметка према умислата, да речам, дека ја имаме загубата, негде имаме околу 60% загуба. Натаму, значи, стварно сме загрижени, сериозно сме загрижени, ако потрае или ако продолжи вака, ќе бидиме негде околу за 2 до 3 години вратени наназад, со производство нема да бидиме развиени, ќе имаме страшни и огромни загуби и намален производен капацитет ќе имаме многу. Според нас, значи, да речеме, треба да види малце државата посериозна кон земјоделците, да имаме откупни центри и за гарантирани цени. Значи најпоќе ни помогнало, значи државата треба да додели повеќе површина државна и да биде повеќе субвенционирани производите, за да можеме да некој, да речам, некоја скала до европските производи, за да дојдеме блиску до нив, мора да ни помогне државата, за да можеме да излеземе од ваквата криза.
Следните месеци, па и години, не загрижува, прво не знаеме колку ќе трае ова, да речем, пандемија. Ако трае подолго и ако лошо поминеме оваа година и уште една година, тоа ќе биде многу лошо за земјоделието. В смисол што голем дел од фабриките не би правеле договори, не би се ширеле толку многу, така да и нашето производство би било намалено или побарувачката би била намалена во поглед на фабриките. И уште една, да речам, главен проблем е што и ние сите како земјоделци реално се плашиме од ова, така да не се опуштаме во некои поголеми проекти за да посадиме повеќе. Никој не знаеме како ќе биде на есен, кога треба да се бери, дали ќе имаме доволно работници, луѓе, па и механизација и се. Сепак јас мислам тука треба и самата држава малку да стави рака, да каже дека да, ако нешто не работи или некоја фабрика, барем тие договорни производства, барем да ги ни подмири трошоците доколку дојде до нешто. Ние еден кикс или една изолација во една фабрика, може да дај месец дена ова е производство што се бери секојдневно. Може да застани производството, треба да офрли договорни цени, тоа секако веќе нема. Меѓутоа барем да знаеме дека дел од трошоците доколку дојде до некој проблем ќе ни бидат надоместени.
Тукумдардын чет өлкөдөн алабызда көбүнчө. Тукумдарыбызды быйыл эми ушул оорунун кесепетинен, COVID-19 оорусунун кесепетинен тукумдарыбызды чет өлкөдөн ала албай калдык көбүнчө тукумчу. Биз негизи жакшы тукумдарды, асыл тукумдарды алып келип себелдейбиз жылдар эле. Бирок быйыл ушул COVID аябай эле тоскоолдук кылып койду. Именно жазга маал карантинде отуруп калдык. Ушу себеби айдоо маалында карантинде болуп, границалардан тукумду киргизе албай калдык. Анан былтыркы үйрөнүүбүздү эле эсептик, балким ошондон да астыраак болду окшойт урожайыбыз. Жазгы үшүк да билет этти окшойт урожайыбызга. Быйылкы жылда деген эгиндерибиз үшүкчүлдөн мурун былтыр мурдагы жылкы салыштырмалуу быйыл бир топ эле ылдыйла түшүп кеттик. Мунун 1 гектардан биз где-то бир 5 тонна, 4 тонна арпа будай алсак, быйыл 2 тонна, 1 тонна кээ бир элдер болду, бу жерде 500 грамм алгандар да болду да. Мен кандай десем, бизде деген азыр биякта алып сатыш дегендер келет, көбүнчө ошолор алып келет. Андан кийинкиси болсо биз негизи өзүбүз чет мамлекетке кетет картошкаларыбыз. Чет мамлекет Өзбекстанга кирет, Казакстанга кирет, Россияга чейин кирет да, жакшы. Именно ушул жерди билбейм, ушу чоң эмин өрөөнүн картошкасын аябай эле макташат көп жердечи. Эми ошол мактаныптан чет өлкөгө да кетет да, экспорт вариантта. Эми быйылкыбызды азыр бааны айта албайбыз, канчадан коюлуп атат. Бирок ылдыйраак болгошу мүмкүн, границалар толук ачылбай атат. Биздин алган тукумубузду фермерлер кандай эми алган урожайыбызды аз болгон аз эмеспи, границадан да чыгарыш да кыйын болуп атат да азыркы учурда ошол.
من لیمون خونه دارم، در درون لیمون خونم لیمون پرورش میکنم. حساب همین لیمون پروری زندگی ما پیش میبرم. کووید-19 به ما ضرر جدی رساند. ما سری وقت نتونستیم که کارگرها را دعوت کنیم. جبورکشی موقف زد، علفچینی موقف زد، داروزنی موقف زد ما هر سال 5-6 تن حاصل میگرفتیم. یعنی جهت ما یک برابر حاصل کم به دست آوردیم. دیمش این سبب که ما یک پکه دارو را 10 سومون میخریدیم، حالی 18 سومون میخریم. لیمون پروری مهنت زیاد را طلب میکند. کسالی اوج بگیرد. ما سری وقت نمیتوانیم که کارگرای موسمی را به کار جلب کنیم.
ягоновои се даромади ман нами занбурпарварӣ аст. COVID-19 моя раҳо баста шуд, воридот содирот карда нашуд. Аз дорувои кимиёвӣ, аз маҳсулоте ки мо дар занбур истифода мебарем камёб шуд. აიმ საბაბ мо зарал мо бисёр калонтар мешавад. Мана исолаш да асал уқа асали бисёр гирифтана тунисем. Пори нас асал бисёр ҳам шуру бо сифати Аллоҳ гирифтем. Исолаш даромади асалмон камтар ҳосил гирифтем. Ҳамин хелохи раҳо маҳкам шавад, дига мо бисёр занбурмро талафот ки доруҳои кимиёвӣ ёфта натунем, маҳсулот қимат мешавад, дига мо зарал мебинем. Солҳое ки пеш мефурӯхтем дигар шаҳрҳо, дигар чо маблағи калон қате ки мефурӯхтем соз буд. Исола ки раҳ маҳкам, маблағ камтар шуда.
Thank you so much. That's an important reminder, and where our food comes from and those people working hard, but also good to hear that there's such resilience built in there right at the local level. Okay, so now we move to a ministerial panel discussion to hear from 4 esteemed panelists representing the respective sub-regions in Europe and Central Asia. And in particular, we'd like to invite them to share their views on the challenges specifically in their sub-region in food and agriculture with the COVID pandemic, as well as the opportunities to scale up joint action, particularly at sub-regional level. So before I do open the floor, maybe just to kindly invite you to keep to 5 minutes, because we would like to preserve some time for some questions and answers, hopefully from the Q&A box. But let me introduce from Georgia, Mr. Levin Davitashvili, the Minister of Environmental Protection and Agriculture in Georgia. I welcome you to speak, and then we'll move on to the next panelist. Many thanks.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Taylor, and I would like to welcome our friends from FAO, our long-term partners and our colleagues from the region. And it's an excellent opportunity to talk about pandemic crisis and the measures actually the country's taken during this pandemic. Of course, I have to agree, our colleague, Mr. Lins from European Parliament, the same challenges we faced in our country, in Tbilisi, in Georgia, like in every other country during long lockdown, we allowed farmers to continue their work in their fields, and we all know that the spring works are extremely important for farming. It was a kind of exception because we had quite a strict lockdown during initial phase of pandemic. It was our approach, like many countries had different approaches, how they actually deal with this crisis, but we had these strict lockdown measures in spring. That time, we allowed farming sector to continue its work, but then about food chain, it's so complex. We understood that it's not only keeping our stores open and make this, food available on the shelves. It's quite complex, and it needed a quite good coordination from different stakeholders. That's why we immediately set up an anti-crisis council within the government, including the different ministries, but also there were subgroups coordinating different sectors. In our case, it was like food sector coordination, because we all remember there were so many interruptions of supply chains, like many countries introduced bans on export, like limiting, bringing quotas and so on. And we understand that in 21st century that all countries are somehow interlinked to each other. And food chains, they are so complex and they are international, especially not only the regional, they are really international. That's why this kind of decisions somehow, of course, bring disruptions in many ways. And we had this opportunity to see film from farmers that they all were affected by COVID-19, even though in all countries like farming was allowed, but still food chains are so complex. It includes different sectors of economy, like production of fertilizers, and not only actually production of fertilizers, but also international and global trade, which is part of which are part of these communications. What we had to do in initial phases with the setup as a coordination council, as I mentioned, and we allowed all these trade channels to work and to communicate with each other. We had regular meetings with different sectors and subsectors of agri-food industry, and try to communicate, engaging also our diplomatic corps to communicate with our neighbors on the regional level. I had personal communication with colleagues in the region and so on, to somehow ease this, pressure on the food chain and food value chain. Now talking about our measures for the agri-food sector. Of course, like in many other countries, we could see that some farmers lost their channels of. Even though overall we can say that agricultural performance is better than any other sector of economy in Georgia, and I think in other countries as well. We have less decrease of GDP in agricultural sector compared to others, but still certain subsectors of agriculture suffered a lot, like because they lost their channels of sales, like Horeca was closed for many months. We all understand, especially in our case where wine sector plays an important role. Of course, wine companies lost their sales in global markets, not only in Georgia. And Georgia is actually depends quite a lot on tourism. It's it's quite a significant part of our economy. We have in the country of 4 million people, around 9 million visitors every year. So of course we lost this tourism because we have these strict limitations on travel like every other country because of pandemic. That's why many subsectors of agriculture, they're affected because of the market loss. Of course they could not sell certain products, but overall performance of agriculture is still okay. We managed to keep this growing trend in agricultural export as well, and agriculture added value in agriculture is still growing in our case. What we actually did, the immediate measures, and I will just list a few of them. Farmers need liquidity. Actually, they need working capital to do some immediate steps, and we introduced preferential loans for farmers. This were like fully subsidized interest rates or no interest rates for farmers for annual crops up to 6-7 months. We guaranteed them because they have lack of collateral, and within this uncertainty, of course, banks are reluctant to finance agriculture or other sectors of economy. That's why we introduced special guarantee scheme and fund from the state, allowing all borrowers to use this special coverage from the state side to access to finance. But we, of course, kept all our regular measures in. We had no cut-off budget because it was so important in perennial crops, in development of agri-food sector in general. But some additional measures we introduced, like certain subsidies for certain groups in farming. I will not go into details because there are so many details. I will leave some space for Q&A session as well. I can summarize that we intervened, that this was an immediate response from our side to assist the groups who needed this assistance in this crisis period. And of course, we have to understand and reevaluate that many countries are dependent to each other, and this global cooperation is so important that we have to keep in mind that even during crisis, we have to continue our cooperation on a regional level, and not only on a regional level, on an international level. That's it.
Thank you, Levan, for those perspectives. And I hand over to Mr. Ion Perju, the Minister of Agriculture, the Republic of Moldova. Thank you very much.
Good day, everybody. Your Excellencies, dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor to participate in the regional high-level dialogue on joint action on COVID-19 in the food and agriculture sector, because each contribution to the discussion is important in identifying proper solution for the mitigating COVID-19 effects Thus, let me briefly express my thoughts on the issue as well as the action undertaken by the ministry and government on this segment. The pandemic forced the governments from all the world to adopt epidemiological measure with measured systematic impact. In the case of Republic of Moldova, in order to limit contamination of the population, the government approved a broad range of measures, including temporary suspension of or restriction of some market services, transport, some trade sector, a number of other services, and public services like education and public administration. Of course, for Republic of Moldova, the agro-industrial sector is certainly more than a priority of the government agenda, as well as an important link in the national economy chain, yielding the equilibrium position over the past years with a GDP share of 21% and constituting about 42% of the total export, as well as a significant share of 36% of the employed population involved in agriculture sector. These indicators are vulnerable to a number of complex challenges such as climate change, economic fluctuation, labor force scarcity, and of course, more recently, the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic. COVID-19 pandemic has caused a number of negative effects on Moldovan agriculture producers, and namely limited the access to trade markets, particularly to agriculture ones, which fact has unlimited led to a drastic reduction in sales income and in liquidity flows. Implicit inputs and raw material supply chain have been disrupted, particularly in area where quarantine measures were imposed. The pandemic crisis occurred in an unfavorable climate context for the agriculture sector of Moldova, since Moldova this year was affected by a very severe drought. The low level of precipitation during the fall-spring season has considerably affected the winter crop plantation, but also spring plantation too. We lost about 50% of the winter crops and more than 50% of the spring crops this year. If we are talking about government measures to mitigate the consequences of the COVID-19 and of course the natural calamities in 2020, short and medium term action have been identified to support agriculture producers and diminish the risk that might emerge during this year. Consolidated an action plan for mitigation of the effects of insufficient rainfall and other natural calamities recorded in 2020 on the activity of economic entities involved in agriculture food sector have been developed. At the beginning of the emergency situation, the ministry managed to unlock the agriculture stores selling inputs like agriculture machinery, equipment, and spare parts, plant protection products, seeds, etc., to ensure, first of all, timely and quality completion of the seasonal work. We authorized the mobile trade marketing of local products in safe condition. We facilitated the cooperation between producers, processors, and exporters. We provided the local products on more promoted the local products on the domestic markets and also in supermarkets. At the same time, segments on which intensive efforts were made related to fiscal segment, temporary exemptions from custom duties and or VAT on agri-food products, partially and temporary exemption from reduction of the land tax rates on compromised areas, but not also on compromised areas also was taken in consideration. Identification of possibilities jointly with the banking sector for rescheduling of interest core payments on loan provided to economic agents and the agri-food sector. Rescheduling and temporary debts to state budget of the economic entities, stimulation of lending on consumption by creating an guarantee fund for agriculture also was provided. Also to stimulate the work in this autumn, about 300 millions, about 15 millions of euro have been allocated to partially compensate for the losses caused by natural disasters. In conclusion, the social economic effects determined by the pandemic demonstrate that, one more time, the importance of agricultural sector sustainable development. This crisis also threats the accomplishment of a number of government targets, particularly of those associated with the living standards of the population. Currently, the short and medium term priorities of the Ministry of Agriculture and Regional Development and Environment are directed to maintain the functionality of the food value chain, increasing the productivity and investment in sustainable food system, providing financial support to farmers to meet their input related to financial needs, the animal breeding sector with forage given the considerable losses of the grain harvest this year, promoting agri-food products on the domestic and foreign markets, developing and putting in place a regulatory framework for mutual funds and credit guarantee funds for agriculture sector. Also stimulating the employment of returned migrants in the country in agriculture and rural areas to ensure sustainable development of the sector through knowledge transfer and innovative technologies for the production and processing of the agriculture products. These priorities, of course, are difficult to achieve without support from development partners. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Perju, for that overview and the challenges there and what you're doing as a country. So now moving to Mr. Karimzada Sadi, the first Deputy Minister of Agriculture from the Republic of Tajikistan. Thank you.
Уважаемые коллеги, позвольте поблагодарить вас и выразить свое уважение и признательность за сотрудничество и в развитии сельского хозяйства. Сегодняшнее мероприятие очень важно для налаживания диалога и определения ориентиров дальнейшего эффективного взаимодействия. Уважаемые коллеги, в Республике Таджикистан наряду с продолжающимся процессом диверсификации национальной рыночной экономики сельское хозяйство продолжает оставаться ключевым сектором экономики. На сельское хозяйство приходится около 20% валового внутреннего продукта страны. Доля занятых в сельскохозяйственной отрасли к общему количеству занятых в национальной экономике составляет 60%. Социально-экономическая важность развития сельского хозяйства не только отражается в показателях, но и занимает ключевое место в стратегических программах развития страны. Национальной стратегии развития Таджикистана до 2030 года одной из основных целей является обеспечение продовольственной безопасности и доступа населения к качественному питанию. В настоящее время, как и во всех странах мира, Таджикистан испытывает негативные последствия пандемии коронавирусной инфекции, что влияет на систему экономики и, в частности, сельское хозяйство. Правительством страны принят и реализуется план мероприятий по предотвращению и снижению воздействия возможных рисков на национальную экономику. В условиях сложившейся ситуации распространения пандемии чувствуется острая необходимость обеспечения сельхозпродукцией населения страны. Принимаются меры по устранению негативного влияния пандемии на сельское хозяйство как основа продовольственной безопасности в стране. По решению правительства страны в республике увеличена площадь посевов, а также увеличена площадь вторичных посевов основных сельскохозяйственных культур. Также перед нами стоит важная задача эффективного использования ресурсов страны с целью получения 2-3 урожаев в год для своевременного обеспечения населения страны продовольствием. В этой связи Министерство сельского хозяйства проводит оценку урожайности сельскохозяйственных культур и продовольственной безопасности, мониторинг цен на сельхозпродукты и содействует разработке эффективных мер уменьшению негативных последствий на сельское хозяйство. Понимая важность обеспечения сельскохозяйственных ресурсов, Министерством проведена оценка нужд и средств производства, это семена и удобрения, из чего следует, что для завершения посевных работ необходимо определенный объем семян, кукуруза, риса, бобовых культур, картофеля, озимой пшеницы, а также минеральные удобрения. Министерство налаживает тесное сотрудничество с партнерами по развитию для поддержки фермеров в доступе к сельскохозяйственным ресурсам и повышению их навыков в этот сложный период. В результате предпринятых мер наблюдается тенденция увеличения урожайности и большого сбора сельхозпродукции. Уважаемые участники, с целью снижения негативных последствий от COVID-19 на экономику, в частности, сферу сельского хозяйства нашей страны, было бы уместно создать механизм взаимодействия по оперативному решению вопросов, касающихся обмена информацией, производства сельхозпродукции, взаимовыгодных поставок по агропродукции и технологии, а также для практического содействия частному сектору в логистике. Расширение сотрудничества в области науки, обучения и обмен не только научными сотрудниками, но и научными достижениями в области инновационных технологий, семеноводства, селекции и так далее. Наряду с этим считаю целесообразно совместно с партнерами по развитию активизировать и скоординировать реализацию региональных инициатив в аграрном секторе с учетом создания соответствующих приграничной инфраструктуры, в том числе логистических центров, холодильных камер, овощехранилищ для эффективного товарооборота сельхозпродукции. Всем желаю успеха и благодарю за внимание. Спасибо.
Thank you very much. Really appreciated. And last but not least, we'll hear from Montenegro and Mr. Darko Konjevic, the Director General Directorate for Rural Development, Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development. Over to you. I believe he's here, but without video. Thank you.
Thank you, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies. I'm pleased to be a part of this regional high-level dialogue on impact of COVID-19 to the agriculture, and I'm pleased that we also have some insights from the field. We saw and we heard what is happening in Georgia, Armenia, Tajikistan, and also we will see now what is happening in Montenegro as a part of the Balkan Peninsula. We are sharing some of the same issues. We are sharing some of the same challenges. As Montenegro is a small economy, we are likely to have face negative cascading effects, which could undo hard-earned development progress and hamper further progress. Like we hear from our colleague from European Commission, we have received general support to our medical services back in the beginning of the year when this pandemic started. And also the government of Montenegro prepared the 3 packages, aid packages to the economy. The first package of measures amounted of 280 million and was predominantly related to maintaining current liquidity and supporting the most vulnerable categories of the population. The second set of measures was created in the direction of preserving jobs and creating preconditions for a faster recovery of the Montenegrin economy, for which about 40 million were allocated. And the third package of measures represented a long-term approach in economics and development. Therefore, the third package of economic measures, which has been launched, is amounted to more than 1 billion euros. Montenegrin agriculture consists of smallholders. Agriculture represents about 6.7% of our GDP. and it's tightly connected with other sectors because Montenegrin economy is service-oriented economy. I closely follow what a colleague from Georgia said, and we are facing almost the same because 1/4 of our GDP is created by the tourism, and tourism drop this year was at the level of 85%. That also influenced the production, and that also influenced what are the agricultural producers doing, and we faced difficulties in selling some of their products. Wine and grapes is one of the products that was problematic to solve. When we were adopting all measures to combat COVID-19, full understanding was expressed for the needs of the agricultural sector, and in order to enable agricultural work to take place in realistically possible terms in accordance with the epidemiological situation. Throughout the period, the market supply of basic raw materials was monitored, and it was assessed that Montenegrin market was and is continually supplied with necessary quantities of seeds, fertilizers, pesticides, animal feed, and more. In such a specific and very demanding conditions, measures have been initiated to stabilize the market, including areas under special epidemiological measures. In order to maintain the existing level of production and maintain the market stability, both in terms of prices and in terms of quantities offered on the market of agricultural products, and maintaining the income stability, which is important in this period of time of agricultural producers and fishermen, a special program of market intervention is adopted. Program contains the measures regarding the withdrawal and storage of surplus of agricultural products and fishery and agricultural products, and assistance in the distribution of products by economic entities that have adequate conditions for these purposes. Also, support to agricultural producers, fishermen, fish farmers, and processors due to market disruption caused by a significant drop in prices in order to maintain price stability and income stability. So it's income support for the farmers, fishermen, fish farmers, and processors. Of course, we also try to solve the issue in the area of assignment of surplus of product to public institutions, hospitals, social housing centers, etc., Red Cross, with a compensation to producers of 100% of market value of their products. Market policy measures for the following products have been activated: milk, cheese, eggs, trout, chokeberry, watermelon, and potatoes. The question is, we preserve the production and we preserve we preserve the income of agricultural producers, but what if the pandemic continues? What we will do right now if we will probably not have tourism for the longer period of time? In that sense, I think the key is in cooperation between the countries through the dialogue that we have in the Western Balkans ministries of agriculture. We are trying to overpass the issues regarding the trade, regarding barriers for trade, and regarding some of the prices that are occurring in different products and productions. I think that also that can be a part of the further agenda, that can be a part of a broader agenda, because the situation with this pandemic is showing us how vulnerable we are as a world, and not as small individual countries like Montenegro is, for example. So in that sense, I support these regional and overall initiatives, and I think this is a good idea to have some kind of the umbrella, especially in the area of agriculture, because agriculture, as we see, didn't suffer too much as some other sector did, like I mentioned tourism. But until when? If this continues, the level of income will drop, and the demand for agricultural products can also drop. So what will be the future? Can we ensure food stability in the region and worldwide? Thank you once again for the invitation.
Thank you very much, ministers. We, FAO, partner organizations, all represented here. We work with you as governments in your countries. And as Beth Bechdel mentioned, we work on policies together, institutional strengthening, collective action, and indeed investment, innovation, partnerships of all sorts for this solidarity of approach. So let me just take you now all to a virtual break. Unfortunately, it doesn't mean we can let you go away and boil yourself a cup of tea or coffee, but please stay with us, keep the Zoom on, and we'd invite you to take a poll. It will literally take you 2 minutes and will allow you to stretch, but we would like you back literally in 5 minutes. So thank you all again. It's been a very rich discussion thus far, and see you in 5. Click on the poll button at the bottom of your screens. There's just a couple of questions. Thank you. Oh, it popped up. Great. See you soon. Okay, hoping you had a small break, welcoming you back, and I'm not sure whether we're going to see the poll results, but they might pop up. Just to remind you that if you do have any questions, there's the question and answer box to pop your questions in there, and any of the panelists, including the ministers who just spoke, can actually write in answers there. Okay, so here are the poll results. You can read them, I think, for yourselves. Good spread of geographic thematic interests. Looking to FAO particularly for technical expertise. Okay. Great. Well, with no further ado, I have the pleasure of introducing our FAO Deputy Director General and Chief Economist, Mr. Maximo Torero Cullen, who will highlight the 7 areas of FAO's global COVID-19 response and recovery program. To say this was launched by our Director General on the 14th of July, and he will talk to those areas, after which I'll invite Mr. Alexander Jones, Director of the Resource Mobilization and Private Sector Partnership Division, to give us a bit of an update on how we are moving forward to attract a diverse set of partnerships. Thank you very much. Over to our Chief Economist, Mr. Maximo Torero. Thank you. I believe we have him online. I'm just checking with colleagues here.
He should be there.
Okay.
We're checking his sound just in a minute.
Okay. So we just wait another moment. Welcome, Mr. Maximo Torero.
Hi,
Thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you very much. So let me share my screen. So give me a minute, please. So thank you very much, and apologize for the minute delay. I was with a meeting with the ambassador from Israel. Deep apologies. So let me please present what we believe will be the situation and what we need to be careful in the following months and in the following years as a result of what we are observing today. So first of all, there are several drivers that are really important today and which have been important in the last years and which is explaining the transformation of the food system. The first one is, of course, the growing human pressure we know, which is migration, pressure over food. The second one is climate change, which is extreme situations that is affecting all our countries. Ecosystem decline, that's why we are calling for the Food System Summit, so that we are sustainable. But the last one is surprises, which is what we are observing today. COVID-19 was a surprise to all of us. And our expectation is that we will get many of these surprises, and these affect significantly what we do and how we do things over time. Now, how we're going to tackle this and how we believe countries should work with us in tackling this. We think that there are 4 key pillars that will allow us to resolve these issues and to be ready to have a sustainable food system, agri-food system in the future. One is data, big data, real-time data, innovation. We need to be flexible and being able to innovate to resolve the challenges. We need to use our technology and have evidence on what works, what doesn't work. And it varies country by country, region by region. But we need to have a strong governance and strong institutions behind that will help that anything we do in innovation on technology doesn't create a problem. On the contrary, it has to be inclusive. And that's why the governance part is extremely crucial. Of course, cross-cutting, you have all the other issues of gender, etc., inequality, but these are the core pillars that operate the machinery that will allow us to have this sustainable agri-food system that we want to put in place. Now, why is so important? Because the world is not on track to achieve food security and nutrition targets. We have seen this in the SOFI. Before COVID-19, we had 690 million people undernourished, 2 billion people that don't have regular access to food, 3 billion people that cannot access to healthy diets. This situation will worsen because of COVID-19. But what we need to keep in mind is that a change has to happen. There is no way, even before COVID-19, we require this change of the agri-food system transformation. Not only is undernourishment, but it's also all the other indicators of malnutrition, stunting, overweight. Overweight is increasing, wasting, low birth weight. Exclusive breastfeeding is the only one that is achieving the target 2025, but it's not achieving the target 2030. So it's on track, but off path to the 2030. And of course, adult obesity, which is increasing substantially. So all our indicators are what we call in red lights. The only one in red, orange light will be exclusive breastfeeding because we are achieving the 2025 target, but not the 2030 target. Now, what are the drivers behind? We know first that climate is a big driver. Climate variability and extremes is a key driver behind rising hunger, and we did this in the previous office. What this graph is showing you is that the countries that are with higher dependence on agriculture and the countries which are very vulnerable to severe droughts are the ones which are affected more in terms of undernourishment. And that is the orange line in the top, followed by the green line, which are countries with vulnerability to climate-related activities, and the purple line, which are countries vulnerable to droughts. These three lines show us that this climate is very important and it could create significant effects over hunger. Second, we know that the marked increase in the number and complexity of conflict and civil insecurity are eroding against food insecurity, leading to many countries to the brink of famine. So when we look today, even with COVID-19 and the countries that were affected because of food insecurity, because of conflict, those are the ones that are doing worse because of COVID-19, despite they don't have the level of cases of COVID-19 that other countries have, which means that this exacerbates the problem, the presence of conflict. We also know that countries that have economic slowdowns and downturns are affected more and are more vulnerable, and therefore they are affected. And this is the linkage between SDG 1 and SDG 2. They are completely interrelated, and we need to look to them together. And especially now, because of COVID-19, we are going into a recession period, which the global GDP growth will decline by -4.8, according to the IMF, and that will have a significant effect on countries and on hunger, and that's why we need to look at this carefully. The deeper recession that we are facing, which is this decline projected to -4.8, 4.9, is in absolute numbers is a cumulative output loss of $12.5 trillion US. $12.5 trillion US. This is a huge number. When we want to resolve, for example, hunger, we are talking of $20, $30, $40 billion a year to move 500 million people out of undernourishment. So just the loss of GDP that we have because of COVID-19 is $12.5 trillion. And this will have an effect on poverty, and depending on the contraction of the economies, the level of poverty will go up. And that's where we need to look carefully at what is going on, and that's why it's so important, the interrelationship between both SDGs, SDG 1 and SDG 2. Why we are so concerned? Because employment will be affected. Agriculture has 1.2 billion jobs, of which that implies 3 billion livelihoods. Now, 30% or 34% of those jobs will be at risk, 451 million jobs in agriculture, which is 1 billion livelihoods. But not only that, if we look at where in the value chain in the food system the major effects are in primary production, only 21.3%. So it's not so bad in primary production. The major problems are in food processing, food services and distribution, 60%. And what is an additional problem is that most of these jobs are done by females. So there is also a gender bias in the problems that COVID-19 will have over employment. So unemployment, especially in developing economies, which are informal, will be a significant problem for us and to look at. And the consequence of that, when we do simulations of the effect of COVID-19 over undernourishment, if we bring all these factors of recession, of employment effects of slowdown and downturns, we get into a point that we will have an increase between 83 to 132 million more people undernourished. And that's chronic. It's different to acute food insecurity. So undernourishment is chronic, and it will be an increase between 83 and 132 million people undernourished. And even worse, it will, and it's already starting to increase inequalities, not only inequalities between countries, because there is a huge increase in inequalities right now because of the capacity of countries to responding to the crisis, but also it will create huge inequalities within countries. And that's what moves us farther from SDG 2, to be able to move out of poverty sustainably. So for us, our priorities is SDG 2 and the nourishment. That is linked to SDG 1 and is linked to inequality, to SDG 14. So we need to look at the three of them as our core function in any country operation that we look at today. And this is what I mentioned before, 3 billion people today cannot access to healthy diets, and most of them are in the red countries in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, are where 75 to 100% of the people cannot access to a healthy diet. So that's unacceptable, and that's something that we need to change substantially. So we need to urgent action. We need to make healthy diets affordable, and this needs to be done sustainably to keep the balancing act between our resources, our environment, and what we need to supply, and the employment we need to generate in the rural areas. And if we achieve this, only by achieving healthy diets, as it was shown in the latest SOFI, we will improve even and reduce the cost of emissions. So just using the current food consumption, this is the level of cost of greenhouse emissions. If we move to a flexitarian diet or to a pescatarian diet, we will have an improvement, a significant improvement in terms of reduction of emissions. So it's a positive effect. It's a synergistic effect to do that effort. So we also have to deal with immediate challenges of conflict and vulnerability and extremes and economic slowdowns, as I mentioned before. But we need to act quickly. We need to respond very quickly to this. Why? Because this is the situation we're facing today. And this photograph, I think, tells you all. We are in a very risky situation. And we need to be careful because we are starting to operate under huge uncertainty of COVID-19. We have not resolved the problem. We don't have yet the vaccines. And anything that we do wrong, if we don't keep the health protocols in place in reactivating our food value chains, we can fall. And the economy is extremely vulnerable, and a second lockdown could have terrible consequences in the future, and many countries are already going into a second lockdown. So we must scale up and accelerate actions to strengthen the resilience of livelihoods and on food systems. That's new. How to improve resilience of food systems is a new issue. It's a complex issue. We normally focus on resilience of households. Even when you take your insurance for your car, you're focusing on your own insurance, your theft insurance for your house. But an insurance for a system is a lot more complex, and that's where we are working and where our new strategy is moving forward. And that means that we have to be resilient, but we need to have short-term actions. Those short-term actions are linked to protect incomes of the poorest through social protection, public work programs, health sector policies, and policies to reduce excessive volatility. Long-term actions to reduce economic vulnerabilities and inequalities is the only way we can be resilient. Build capacity to withstand shocks, create healthy and food environments, inclusive structural transformation to get away from commodity dependence and fostering poverty reduction. And those measures will require savings, will require the economies to use efficiently their resources and to target, because resources will be very restricted. So we need to properly target the resources that we're going to use. And we need to do it within an institutionality that focuses on the key challenges, but also brings the institutions and the incentives to be able to do things properly, so that we can model scenarios, assess the trade-offs of each intervention we do, so that we can minimize those trade-offs and maximize the synergies. And we need to bring all the actors into place through partnerships and building coalitions and bringing the private sector into the game. It's central that we work with the private sector because they are key players in what we do. So let me finalize by saying where we need to prepare for the future. The first thing, this is a meat plant industry. This was before and this is after. This change won't resolve the problem of COVID-19. So this sector has to go through a deeper transformation. And that deeper transformation is automatization. But automatization will have a consequence over labor. Automatizations will happen and is happening in the plot. And we are looking for an automatization that is scale neutral. No matter you are small or large, you can use it. Because if we understand perfect the concept of precision agriculture, the ones who really need to be very precise in how they use their money is the smallholders. But precision agriculture is designed for large holders. And we need to change that. Automatization will happen in all those three areas of the food system that I mentioned. 60% of the jobs were at risk: in packaging, processing, and distribution. And jobs are not ready for that. The labor supply doesn't have the capacities and the skills to resolve that. We need to create the way to resolve that and to create the capacities. We will be moving vegetables closer to cities because we can produce them in controlled environments and it's cost effective. But we need to be ready for that. Vertical farming still is not ready, it's not cost effective, but horizontal it is, and controlled environments. And when we look at the trade flow in the world, vegetables travel the shortest distance today, relative to cereals, relative to meat, relative to livestock. So that is going to happen, it's already happening. Vegetable production will be closer, fruits won't be the case. Animals won't be the case, staples won't be the case, but vegetables, yes. And finally, e-commerce will be there and will accelerate the process. But to have e-commerce, we need 4 conditions. We need the connectivity for sure. We need the platform. We need mobile money or e-mobile money. But we also need the distribution system, the mailing system. Most of our countries, developing countries, can have connectivity, like Africa, can have mobile money, can have the platform, but they don't have the mailing system. If we don't have the 4 elements, we won't be able to push this type of e-commerce, which will bring things closer and accelerate the process of matching demand and supply, and will increase the level of returns for the farmers. Today in the US, a farmer receives 0.20 cents per dollar purchased. Okay, so the level that the farmer receives is very small because of all the elements in the chain. The more we promote this type of initiatives, the bigger will be the return for the farmer in place. So COVID-19 pandemic, I think, has sent us a wake-up call that we need to be ready. We need to have a food system which is resilient, but also provides us with the opportunity to reevaluate how we tackle the root causes of hunger and build resilience against threats to build back better. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you for those hard facts and data, and certainly the wake-up call there, and for FAO, bringing those technical policy and all those dimensions to us all. So over to Alex on how we're building those partnerships to work together to realize how to overcome some of these challenges and work together. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Katrin, and thank you to everybody for hosting me here. Let's see if I can share my screen. Okay, can you see that? Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. I just want to give a quick introduction to our response and recovery plan. I'll be very, very brief. Maximo Torero's already gone over most of the basics of the why and the how we need to respond. I just want to mention a bit the mechanism, because what we've done has been rather unique in the FAO experience, and we're very pleased with the way it's working thus far. Okay. This was launched by our Director General in mid-July, already it was pretty early in the cycle when we were just gearing up to respond to some of these issues. And the whole intention of the program was to provide something, first of all, which was building back better, not just filling the gaps and addressing immediate crisis issues, but actually aiming at reversing some of the negative impacts to the achievement of the SDGs. We don't just want to recover the ground lost due to the COVID crisis. We want to use the opportunity to go beyond that, because as Maximo Torero pointed out, we were not on track. We are not on track, and we were not even before the COVID crisis. So it's a comprehensive program which is addressing all the dimensions, so short, medium, and long term. As you know, we tend to have, not just us, but all of our partners tend to have a fragmented approach where we go for short-term impacts under humanitarian and resilience interventions, and then our developmental, medium, and long-term programs. This is a single approach for all of it. Another important aspect is that we're setting a single milestone for all of FAO's activities. A comprehensive program. We know FAO throughout the years has had a chronic program with silos, and the intention is to speak with one voice for all the areas that we're working on and integrating them. And last but not least, and of course very important for you in the region, is working as one decentralized and headquarters exercise. So avoid that dimension of fragmentation, which we know is a constant challenge. So the overall funding target for our 7 key priority areas, which you can see here, is a 1.3 billion appeal. And a large chunk of that, as you can see, goes under the Global Humanitarian Response Plan. Many of the immediate needs are extremely severe. And of course, this is a subset of the Global UN Humanitarian Response Plan. So FAO's section of that is included in this. But we've included also many areas covering the full spectrum of response. Data for decision making is a key one. We need better information. We need the ability to forecast and provide indicators as well on our progress. Social protection, economic inclusion, trade and food standards. This has been very important. Recent news has actually been fairly positive on the trade impacts. We were very worried about the potential for disruptions in trade systems in the beginning of the pandemic, but of course, as we head in many countries into a phase 2 and other potential lockdowns, this is always on the horizon. Boosting smallholder resilience, this is critical. Smallholders have the least capacity to cope with a crisis, the least resources, and we need to build that back. Preventing the next zoonotic pandemic is essential, and we have received them, and moving into a whole food systems transformation. And as Maximo Torreira pointed out now, of course, building resilience into a food system is far more complex and expensive than building individual resilience of households. This is kind of where we stand, excuse me, so far. We've had a total of about 161 billion in contributions between approved FAO allocated TCP resources, which of course come from you, our member states, and pipelines that are now being finalized. So we have about a 12.5% response, which I think is doing pretty well. As you all know, response to appeals is generally much lower than could be desired, but we're quite satisfied with this, bearing in mind that, of course, the bulk of this funding has come in for the humanitarian segment, as would be expected in the first phase. But there is quite a lot more being developed right now for the longer term actions. And we've been very encouraged also by support, for example, from the World Bank in this segment, which is not traditionally a big provider of funds for early phases. I do want to stress that all of these funds are collected under a single umbrella program, which is a fairly new approach in FAO, which allows our resource partners to contribute in a fully earmarked way. All of these funds have been totally earmarked to date, but it provides us with a comprehensive framework, both to aggregate them around individual program priorities, but also to track, report, and feedback on achievements of the program, while retaining the flexibility of individual donors who want to contribute to a single multi-donor fund or to a single country program or to broad global programs, which of course is our preference. So just to stress, and I've been given a very short time slot, so I'm looking at Catherine here, just to stress the key points. We want a one FAO response, and we are getting a one FAO response to this pandemic, and this is in itself extremely valuable. We feel that this can provide contributions to many of the priority areas that we are addressing. We've identified these 7, or as we call them, 6+1, including the humanitarian aspect. And it's through a flexible mechanism that can accommodate the requirements of our many donors. We are not saying no to anybody. We are more than happy, and we are very well aware of the current drop in resources. The financial crisis that Maximo Torreira was describing is, of course, already translating into development assistance. The forecast is most likely that we will be facing globally about a 20% drop in ODA. Global ODA is $153 billion a year last year. So we're looking at a $30 billion drop, which is very significant. And we can expect that an increasing amount of those funds will go towards humanitarian response, which tends to be the first priority. So it is a smaller pot, and we need to be as flexible as possible and adapt to the needs of our member states, because we understand the constraints that they are facing, all of you are facing in your home countries, with the needs for economic stimulus and medical plans and so forth. So overall, we are strengthening the technical coordination around these program priorities, and also improving our level of communication. So thank you very much. I hope I'm within the time frame allocated.
Thank you very much, Alex, who happens to be my boss. And yes, I do believe you were. So thank you so much. Okay, so over to Raymond Yele, the regional program leader, to give us more detail on what FAO is doing in Europe and Central Asia. Thanks all.
Yeah, thank you very much, Catherine. Thank you, Maximo, and also Alex, to in this case, set the scene. Of course, we are a bit under, I think, time pressure. So I will probably trying to go also quite quickly, because we have shared with all of you also a short background note also last night, where we outlined the key elements also of the response program. And I think we want definitely to give you also space in order to react and also to respond in this dialogue. So let me, in this case, really be brief. I have two, let's say, in principle, sections which I want to talk about. The first one is, of course, outlining what are the issues and where are the problems in the region. But of course, we have heard now from the ministers panel. We have also heard through the video several of these areas. So I'm not going to go here that much into the detail, but rather focusing then on the response activities within the global program we have. The first issue, again, also just to emphasize and also to confirm, and this is related to that our response is very closely coordinated within the UN response at the country level, as it has been already mentioned also by Kwi at the beginning, that we're working under the UN reform. So I think being coherent and consistent also at the country level is quite important. So we maybe go to the next slide. And what I just quickly here also wanted to mention, we are all aware that, of course, the pandemic and also the economic crisis following has, from a projection point of view of GDPs, quite significant contractions in the region. And what you can see here on the slide is the red ones, which have significant projection in terms of the contraction of the GDP. But on the other hand, I also want to mention there are a couple of countries where there is also a positive let's say growth still to be expected. Of course, compared to the previous year, it's significant also lower. The second indicator, I think, which we want to mention here, and that has to do also with what Maximo also said, job losses. We will have danger of poverty increase in the region, and this is related particularly not only to the income directly from agriculture, but it's certainly also to the remittances. So as you can see here, without going into the detail, we have an expectation of that remittances are, compared to 2019, are going back to between 20 to 25% in the region, and particularly in some of the countries. As you know, in for example, in Tajikistan, 30% of the GDP comes also from remittances. So we can definitely understand how important that is and what kind of socioeconomic implications this could have in the region. The next slide, just also very briefly, again, on issues. I mean, we have talked about slowdown of food exports and sales. I have put here on the right-hand side a short graph. What did that mean, for example, in the Western Balkans so far? And you can see here also a mixed picture. And this is something which comes out in various discussions, that we have some countries very significantly have decreases in exports or inputs. But we have, on the other hand, also, for example, Serbia in agriculture. There is both in terms of export or import, there is an increase compared to 2019. One thing what, of course, I also want to mention is that there are also positive signs. Despite the lockdown, we have some countries of the region, the spring crop sowing area has been also increased. So in fact, this is fully in line with that the harvesting and the global also crop stocks is not something which at the moment is at risk, particularly also in some of the countries. Let's go maybe to the next slide, and to give you also a quick understanding of what are really the problems in the region. And we have done from April up to June on a weekly basis in 18 countries of the region, a so-called rapid survey, which comprised on the weekly basis having interviewed around 700 farmers or 700 food chain actors. And out of these ones, we have been able to draw some of the conclusions, and one of the key one is that there are certainly financial problems by the COVID for many of them. As you can see here, if we compare Eastern Europe or Central Asia, a lot of them have strong ones amongst the farm level. It's more in the Central Asia, but of course also medium term problems. So the access for the farmers to finance, the access of the food traders to finance is of course also an important issue for them. We can skip the next slide, and just maybe one additional point which we wanted to mention when we're talking about the problems so far, but we have also seen that the resilience of the agriculture sector is not as weak as maybe in some cases it was projected, that we can really also see that we have in some cases not just more agriculture area and so on, but we have also seen that in some countries the agriculture sector was the only one who was still having a growth, while the other sectors were in fact decreasing compared to last year. And that means also the agriculture sector could be seen also as an opportunity to further bring the growth back, an opportunity also to achieve, in this case, also the SDGs. And if we are putting two figures on the agriculture orientation index on one hand and the agriculture productivity, it definitely calls for more investment into the agriculture sector. The orientation index is in principle the share of government expenditure in agriculture against the weight of agriculture in the GDP. And if you compare, for example, New Zealand with some of the Central Asian countries, you have really a very low index for some of these countries. And this is something which require increase of investment, and the labor productivity, of course, is in this case also quite low. Now, having spoken already quite some time about the issues in the region, let me spend another probably 5 to 6 minutes here on the response. Alex and Maximo were already outlining this. What I think we need to emphasize, we have 6 target areas in the region on the basis also of the problems, which means the social protection and the poverty, food systems transformation. Maximo was giving more details, what it means also from a global point of view. We have, of course, the issue of trade and food safety standards. The smallholder issue in the region is something key, because the region is dominated by the smallholders. We have a very low let's say average amount of land across the region, with some exceptions in some of the countries. The zoonotic disease, the One Health approach, is the 5th one, and data for decision making is certainly another one. Now, how is this going to be embedded? We were giving also an emphasis at the beginning. It was mentioned also by Bev as well as by Vladimir Ragmanin, that of course the response, taking the specific situation of the region into consideration, is fully embedded in our overall programmatic focus. So the programmatic focus at the regional and country level with the country programming frameworks, but also the regional initiatives, in order to make sure that we are working here on a coherent and a consistent way, so that the 6 target areas and the 10 programmatic proposals which we have put up, that they are really fully integrated, and that we are in fact supporting both the medium as well as also the long-term effects of the COVID. Now, in these 6 areas, and this would be actually, sorry, we have to go to the next slide. Next slide. Yeah, so I was in fact already talking about this when I was talking about the 6 target areas, when I was talking about the 10 programmatic proposal, and how in fact the regional program is embedded then into the regional initiatives, the different country programming frameworks, as well as also then the partners which we need to involve and we need to include. Now, very quickly to the let's say the 6 target areas or the 10 programmatic proposals. I'm not going to go into the details of each, taking also the time into consideration. Under the target area economic inclusion, so next slide, please. Under the target area of economic inclusion and social protection, we have 3 key program areas which we want to focus on. Of course, local food production has been, please go back to the slide. Yeah, local food production has been something with the COVID to be further emphasized. We have large areas of abandoned land in the region, and we have to improve, in this case also, the farm structure. For example, in Armenia, 1/3 of the arable land is still unutilized. Important here is also the social protection. We talked about the importance of remittance and therefore the implication it's going to have. And Maximo was also referring to the issue of gender. Gender equalities are still a key issue in the region. And what you can see also from this target area here, it really is fully supportive in order to achieve also the SDGs. Let's move to the next slide. And this would be the food systems transformation. We have 2 areas, local value chains need to be further improved. The local value chains will aim at strengthening increased access and diversifying more the local markets. E-agriculture, e-platforms, as it has been mentioned also by Maximo, play an important role. The second area, which we have also mentioned, is responsible investment. I outlined that we need to further invest into the agriculture sector in order to be able to support export diversification to various other new markets in the region and certainly also outside of the region. If we move to the next slide, boosting the smallholder resilience for a recovery as a target area. We mentioned before, smallholders have a quite important function and importance in the region due to the structure that many countries have here. Still farmers which have less than 5 hectares, and so giving them, improving also their capacities, moving technology to these farmers, bringing innovation to them is certainly quite important in order to support their economic development, as well as also as a key component to reduce really also rural poverty. The fifth area which we have next slide is trade and food safety standards. The pandemic has certainly shown that food safety standards in some cases have been even tightened in the trade, and so more investment and more emphasis in the region need to be given to the trade promotion and also the food safety standards. So trade facilitation through market research on new trade corridors, digital solution is something which is quite important. Next slide is the last, let's say, 2 areas. We talked about the One Health approach. Of course, it made it very obvious that the preventing pandemics of animal origin are really quite important. So preventing such pandemics are really important to have here vital partnerships amongst WHO, OIE, as well as also of course, scale up a One Health approach and to promote also the rollout of national One Health response strategies, where more in this context also need to be done. But of course, also the data capacity, the data collection at the national level is something which is absolutely important in order to also be in a position to better assess and to better get understanding of what is the situation at the country level. Now, let me close in this case at the moment with the last slide. We have in fact all these programmatic areas are certainly large and complex, and in this case, of course, the question which is now to you is what kind of concrete partnerships for immediate actions can be also taken, and we certainly also need to further collaborate on these priority areas in order to achieve the impact. And so what are your perspectives, and how can we join up, how can we scale up together in order to support this? So with this, I will close my presentation. Thank you. Over to you, Catherine.
Okay. All right, thanks for that in-depth overview of the COVID response. As noted, that popped up in the chat, I believe a brochure, just quickly giving a summary of those areas, those 6 areas that you described, Raymond, is now available. But we move now on to you, our partners, our colleagues in development, to hear what you think about the response that we're proposing and how we might join hands, if you like, to partnering together to scale up. So we do actually have 12 panel members, quite a few, and I'm very sorry that time is tight, so we'll try to, if possible, get you to stick to 3 minutes each with some clear bullet points. But in your response, I think what we're asking here is, what are your perspectives on FAO's, if you like, framework of action? How is your organization potentially considering to scale up partnership with FAO, or how are there synergies between what we're doing and what you're doing? So let's kick off then with Ms. Susan Schlack from Germany, and she is an Agri-FAO Working Party Chair from the Ministry of Food and Agriculture. Thank you, Ms. Susan. Welcome, and over to you for your thoughts.
Thank you so much, and it's wonderful to be participating in this really very interesting seminar. So thank you, FAO, and everyone who is online for inviting me, and I will try to be really brief. So first of all, maybe a lot has already been said, of course, and I would just like to highlight a few points where Germany is particularly concerned, and where there are also, I think, interlinkages with our work with FAO and what FAO is already doing. So first of all, Germany is very concerned about, of course, the multifactorial and multidimensional effects of COVID-19, the pandemic, and this is what we have heard about a lot in this morning. So looking at it from an international point of view, we are very much, let's say, we put our priorities in food security, the food supply chains, food systems, the One Health approach, and also AMIS. These few points are really, really in the heart of our, let's say, activities, and it is also actually closely linked with EU engagement, because since we have the EU presidency in Germany at the moment, and I'm chairing the FAO Working Party, these are also really points that we are heavily working on right now in the EU, and where we are in close contact with FAO. So first of all, and we have heard about this also already, COVID-19 has, of course, tremendously influenced already the food security situation, and of course, economic challenges that are increasing food insecurity and aggravate the already existing crisis. And so here, as a representative right now of the Ministry of Food and Agriculture in Germany, this is really something that we try to highlight highlight also in our government, because of course there are lots of reactions to COVID-19, but sometimes it is still necessary to also point at the dimension of worldwide food insecurity in this regard. So therefore our cooperation with FAO is really important to us. And what we also try right now in our direct project cooperation with FAO to highlight, especially for example, the role of food supply chains, which are of course crucial to, on the one hand, strengthen the economies in fragile contexts, but also keep the added value where it belongs, and by that of course also support food security. Then food systems is another aspect, and I am absolutely grateful for the UN that they will be setting up the World Food Systems Summit next year. That is really one of the major activities at the moment, and all of us, I think the global reaction to it is very intense, and we really like to support what is happening there. We are in the EU and also in Germany very active in regard to this. We support a lot the voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition, which are of course also a cornerstone for this summit. One Health and AMR, and I'm grateful that this was mentioned already. I think this pandemic has really shown how important this issue is, and Germany has been very active in this regard. We support WHO, OIE, and here again I'm really grateful for FAO's engagement in the tripartite cooperation, and I think this is something we have to continue focusing on and working on, and it has been, I mean, it is now a topic in all of the governing bodies of FAO, so this is very much appreciated as well. And we as a country, but also in the EU, put a lot of effort in this regard. And then last but not least, maybe AMIS. This is a very important instrument as well to really guarantee transparency of our markets, to see what is going on, and to also have a very, I think, effective tool here that I wanted to highlight real shortly also in this regard. And maybe I stop here because you are very busy with all of the other partners online, but just to highlight a few aspects. And thank you so much. Over to you again.
Great, short and specific, and we like specific. That's fantastic. Okay, so over now to Miss Dilyara. You have to forgive me if I can't pronounce your second name well. Ravilova-Baravik, and you are from the Russian Federation, Deputy Permanent Representative of the Russian Federation to FAO. Thanks.
Большое спасибо. Всех хочу поприветствовать. Спасибо за приглашение принять участие в этой встрече. Действительно, очень важный диалог, особенно если учесть, что в следующем месяце наши страны соберутся на региональную конференцию ФАО для Европы. И уже понятно, что одним из центральных вопросов будет вопрос реакции на COVID-19. Несколько слов для того, чтобы сэкономить время. Российская Федерация, как всем известно, играет важную роль в обеспечении продовольственной безопасности региона. И поэтому, естественно, правительство нашей страны в первую очередь принимает все меры для того, чтобы здравоохранительный кризис не перерос в продовольственный. Потому что то, сколько будет произведено в нашей стране, влияет не только на обеспечение населения России продовольствием, но и влияет на рынок продовольственной продукции общеевропейский. В этой связи мы намерены продолжать активно взаимодействовать с продовольственной сельскохозяйственной организацией в рамках того плана, тех 6 основных направлений, которые были представлены. Считаем, что все 6 тематических направлений очень четко обозначены и очень своевременно намечены те меры, которые необходимо принять для того, чтобы эффективно среагировать на кризис. В первую очередь, что мы намерены сделать? Наша страна намерена продолжать финансирование тех совместных проектов, которые у нас уже есть с ФАО, для того, чтобы в первую очередь обеспечить устойчивость уже тех результатов, которые получены, а во-вторых, стимулировать дальнейшее развитие этих тематических и проектных направлений с учетом уже негативных последствий COVID-19. Это такие проекты, как мы полностью согласны с только что выступившим представителем Германии, это борьба с антимикробной резистентностью. Это борьба с заболеваниями животных. Это обязательно обеспечение доступа к здоровой и сбалансированной пище. Это обязательно проекты по снижению потерь пищевых продуктов.
Dilaria, sorry, could we interrupt you for 1 second? Translation issue. Could you switch to the Russian channel, because we have at the moment both languages at the same time?
Okay.
Could you, on the bottom of the Zoom, switch to the Russian channel?
Is it okay now?
Now I think it should be okay. Now it's okay. Now it's okay.
It's okay? Thank you so much. И, естественно, это оказание продовольственной помощи, непосредственной продовольственной помощи. Последний аспект в большей мере имеет отношение к нашему сотрудничеству с Всемирной продовольственной организацией, однако и ФАО в этом кластере, в кластере непосредственной гуманитарной помощи, естественно, для нас важен как партнер. Что конкретно еще мы хотели бы предложить? В рамках своих национальных усилий по реагированию на кризис правительство Российской Федерации уже выработало ряд эффективных решений. В частности, эти решения касаются задействования государственной и грантовой поддержки для малых и средних сельхозпроизводителей, для фермеров, которые, естественно, столкнулись с большими проблемами. Второе – это снижение ставок по договорам по лизингу, о предоставлении льготных займов. Это то, о чем говорилось в видеоролике и о чем говорили представители непосредственно аграрии, которые работают в странах Центральной Азии, те проблемы, с которыми они столкнулись. В рамках тех решений, которые на национальном уровне уже приняты, мы готовы поделиться этими решениями и обсудить с руководством ФАО, какие из этих мер и пакетных решений могли бы быть имплементированы, может быть, теми странами региона, которые заинтересованы или пока не выработали свою позицию в этих вопросах. Помимо этого, мы готовы обсудить и предоставить, обсудить возможность задействования лабораторных возможностей лабораторий Российской Федерации по борьбе с заболеваниями животных. До сих пор не закрыта еще проблема африканской чумы свиней, и поэтому это большой удар по животноводству, поэтому в этой связи, и существуют и другие заболевания, в этой связи мы готовы рассмотреть возможность взаимодействия с ФАО на этом треке. И последнее, но может быть не менее важное. Сегодня как раз в Москве открылось крупнейшее сельскохозяйственное мероприятие, наше национальное, российское, это выставка «Золотая осень-2020». Из-за того, что мероприятие проходит в видеоформате, есть возможность подключиться к нему. И главное, что, естественно, что одной из главных тем этого мероприятия будет как раз ответ российского сельхозпроизводителя на вызовы пандемии и то, каким образом Российская Федерация могла бы наладить связи и дополнительно стимулировать то сотрудничество, которое есть и с международными организациями, и по двусторонней линии со странами региона для того, чтобы совместно преодолеть последствия пандемии и не допустить той самой угрозы вселенского масштабного голода, о которой несколько раз говорил Дэвид Бизли из ВПП, руководитель ВПП. Поэтому мы считаем, что многое из того, что можно было бы обсудить и что следует сделать, нужно делать действительно, как сказал Массимо Тореро, незамедлительно, по возможности совместными коллективными усилиями и в виде финансовой помощи, и в виде in-kind, и в виде каких-то решений, да, которые могли бы быть приняты или которые могли бы быть выработаны в рамках обмена опытом. И, конечно же, последнее, это, о чем я хотела бы сказать, это общесистемный, общеооновский ответ. Потому что по факту получается, что организации, что партнеры, доноры сотрудничают с большим количеством организаций системы ООН. Это не только ФАО, ВПП и ИФАТ, которые расположены на Римской площадке, но это и ЮНИДО, Международная организация по промышленному развитию, который так или иначе отвечает за промышленную базу аграрного сектора. Это и ВОЗ, это и Международная организация по здоровью растений. И для того, чтобы проекты, которые осуществляются и финансируются донорами, имели максимальный результат, очень важно обеспечить синергию между этими проектами, с тем, чтобы донорские средства, которые поступают, имели по разным каналам, по линии разных организаций, работали взаимосвязанно. И проекты дополняли друг друга. В этом мне это кажется поможет, по моему мнению, это поможет преодолеть разрывы и позволит именно перед лицом пандемии серьезные комплексные проблемы дать комплексный ответ. Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you very much. A pleasure to our ears, those of us that work in resource mobilization and with South-South and Triangular, just to hear what you were saying there about synergies, working together with other UN and indeed with partners yourselves to channel funds in one direction or resources in kind contributions. Thank you so much. Okay, so over to Turkey and Miss Eileen Çağlayan Yücan, excuse me, Director General for the EU and Foreign Relations of the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry. Welcome from Turkey, thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Catherine. Distinguished excellencies and dear participants. First of all, I would like to thank to FAO for launching this dialogue, which provides us an important platform to discuss and realize the proposed regional response for the recovery of the agricultural sector. I would like to make an overview regarding the situation in Turkey and what is our perspective for the next period. As the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, we have started working on possible scenarios just few weeks ago from the date of the occurrence of the coronavirus case in Turkey. Therefore, in early March, we have started to coordinate the logistics and the distribution of agricultural products together with the other stakeholders in order to prevent any interruption in marketing. In consultation with non-governmental organizations, a joint action plan has been taken to prevent any disruption in supply chain when our products reach from our stock to the final consumers. While doing all these, inspections at sites all over the country regarding COVID-19 hygiene precautions in food products, food preparation process, food input supply, and animal food products hygiene is at highest levels. One of the most difficult consultation period was the regulation of the transportation of the living conditions of seasonal workers according to the COVID-19 health measures. Believe me, we spent too much effort to convince the Ministry of Interior and the Ministry of Health as well at that period. On the other hand, interest-free loans are provided to the small farmers and food processing industry for investments and operations. Agricultural support payments have been started in advance. Exemptions are provided to the continuous delivery and sale of agricultural inputs. So since then, we haven't faced any problem in production, stock, and supply chain of basic food products. Starting from the pandemic, wholesale and retail sales were maintained in order to ensure the availability of the basic food products with a long shelf life at affordable price and to prevent speculative activities. Price changes and stock levels of products which are suitable for storage, such as wheat, potato, pasta, onion, and citrus, are strictly controlled by our ministry in cooperation with Ministry of Trade. Another important step was taken in allocation of the state lands to the farmers. We started to allocate state lands to the family farmers without any charge for strategic plantations such as cereals, pulses, oil seeds, and forage crops. Dear participants, as Turkey, we give more emphasis on using digital solutions and technology and responsible consuming. As the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, we attach great importance to the digitalization in agriculture, and we have made our plans to give momentum to this area as of 2020. We have launched the digital agriculture market, which is called BITAP, that will cover the entire food supply chain from food production to the consumption. And this platform includes a wide range of members of small farmers to the big players in retail sectors and provide to our farmers many new opportunities and facilities to strengthen their marketing capabilities and effective financial instruments. This digital platform, this system also allows contracting farming too. As everybody aware that the pandemic once again pointed out the importance of food security, agriculture, and sustainable use of natural resources. Therefore, we gave importance to the responsible consumption and the issue of food losses and waste. Actually, during Turkey's G20 presidency in 2015, we have incorporated the issue of food loss and waste in the world agenda. Since then, we had many workshops with all stakeholders in the system. And finally, we adopted a strategy in order to prevent and reduce of food losses and waste at national and regional level in the context of combating climate change and ensuring food and nutrition security. With our national strategic document and its action plan, we disseminate our vision from the national to global level, together with our long-lasting partner, FAO. We have initiating a regional project on reducing food loss and waste in Turkey and Central Asia within the scope of the FAO Turkey Partnership Program. And under this project, a national campaign, which is called Save Your Food, was launched in May. By this campaign, Turkey and FAO aim fighting against food loss and waste and raising public awareness both nationally and internationally, and disseminate the good practices at regional level. Esteemed participants, I tried to summarize the most important steps having been taken in agriculture and food sector and share some specific examples from Turkey. I hope this dialogue platform leads to concrete solutions and actions, and we are ready to share our experience and knowledge as well. hope to overcome COVID-19 and its effects as soon as possible. Thank you for listening. Thank you very much for this organization.
Thank you. And your lesson learning reminds us of the Food Coalition, and that's exactly what that initiative aims to do, is bring countries together and share experience across the spectrum. So let's keep that in mind as we move forward with Miss Marika Olsen, the Director of the Office of Economic Growth, USAID, Georgia. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me. And I'm happy to be here. I will try to speak as quickly as possible while still being intelligible given the time. So again, I'd first like to briefly discuss what USAID Georgia's response to the COVID crisis has been. We've been focusing on rebuilding and strengthening those sectors hardest hit, like the minister mentioned, tourism, while taking advantage of some of the new opportunities for high value employment in emerging sectors like ICT. And we do hope to continue to work with FAO and other partners in expanding some of the successes in agriculture, especially in areas that are hard to reach, like Abkhazia, where our joint work on integrated pest management means that farmers are seeing bumper harvests for hazelnut and increased incomes despite the pandemic. So looking at the FAO's response plan framework, USAID expects in Georgia to continue to work with the areas of economic inclusion, trade, and food safety. And for us, that means integrating rural areas into the wider Georgian economy, building trade and economic linkages, again, between hard to access areas like Abkhazia, and linking that to the Tbilisi administered territory, and ensuring that Georgia can continue to improve the quality of its products to access lucrative international markets. Again, we're very proud of the work that we've been doing with the IPM program here in Abkhazia, improving the quality of hazelnuts up there. So moving forward, USAID Georgia will continue to focus on opportunities to build linkages between FAO programs and areas like Abkhazia and majority minority communities, integrating underserved communities into national supply chains and economies. Our intent is that the rising tide of Georgia's success, which we've seen in cities like Tbilisi, actually lifts all boats and not just those anchored in the major urban centers. We also want to ensure that the economic gains that we have seen bolster the strong democratic gains that Georgia has built and encourage resilience to shocks, COVID and otherwise, that may influence those gains. So again, moving forward, we're really excited to see what FAO is going to come up with in the areas of economic inclusion, trade, and food safety. And I'll turn it back over.
Thank you for those offers of collaboration and existing areas. To now Bernard Hein, the head of the Sub-Regional Office and Country Director, a fellow RBA member from IFAD, Turkey. Thank you.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, dear colleagues. Actually, I would like to start by thanking the FAO colleagues for extending this invitation to IFAD. And actually, clearly from the presentation we've seen this morning and the various remarks, it is clear that this outbreak will keep unfolding for several months and even for several years, with deep implications for food security and also threat to actually reverse the progress we've made so far to achieve SDG 1 and SDG 2. With these challenges ahead, clearly greater experience sharing and also solidarity is needed to actually help build a long-term resilience. And today's dialogue is timely, really timely for discussing plan and promoting partnership for a stronger engagement in this region. And for this, I would like to actually extend my congratulations to FAO for its leadership on the matter, and also to the respective member state government in the region for the measures they've taken so far to contain the spread of the virus and ease the burden on the economy. We just heard from the Turkish participant what was done in Turkey. In IFAD, our wider operational response is structured around 4 instruments. The first one is a post-stimulus facility to allow member states to address recovery. The second is a restructuring mechanism which allows countries to repurpose funds under ongoing project for a rapid response. And the third one is a private sector initiative to alleviate the effect of the pandemic on the small farmers while preserving jobs and incomes. And the last one is a policy and analytical support to the national policy responses. Over the past 5 months, while research mobilization is ongoing for the stimulus facility, we launched the instrument with a 40 million seed financing from IFAD. And this has allowed during the past 4 months to actually support 41 sub-regional and country level COVID-19 initiatives, and 40% of those initiatives of the financing address urgent input access issues to make sure that the farmers were prepared to engage into the next planting season. 20% went to measures to increase market access, and 10% went into rural finance, and 30% to digital services, including support to e-trainings. The second instrument, the repurposing mechanism, provided 200 million to 88 projects in 58 countries to actually provide, again, access to input, address market issues, and also digital information. And in the region, Bosnia and Herzegovina was the first actually in IFAD to process such an instrument, providing benefiting to about 9,000 rural households. And regarding the private sector, we are actually collecting proposals, and we've earmarked for that $25 million to support non-sovereign private sector operations, which aim at preserving the income and the jobs, as I mentioned a while ago, while alleviating the effect of the crisis on the small producers. And we expect to analyze this, to process this by the end of this year, by December. Under the fourth element of our response, we are working with governments and development partners to identify how to better support national policy responses. And to that effect, 27 studies are ongoing across 26 countries with combined financing of $500 million. And the studies are conducted in collaboration with the various UN country teams, including FAO, WFP, and also other development agencies. In some countries, we are working on them with the World Bank. And most of them focus on the rapid assessment, as mentioned by Raymond, with some sort of emphasis on the challenges faced by the youth and also the rural women. And we will be releasing very soon in Turkey, jointly with FAO, UNDP, and the Turkish Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, a joint impact assessment report. Having said that, we clearly support FAO's proposed regional framework. We support the 6 priority areas that were presented here. We found that they complement nicely and in a coherent manner various ongoing initiatives and delineate clearly a way forward to step up collectively our effort to protect the rural communities and to help them recover from the effect of this crisis. Personally, I look forward to joining hands with FAO in the region, the various governments, and international organizations. Our collaborations in Turkey will drive in the short to mid-term specific initiatives and investment, and we look forward to replicating this in other countries in the region. Over and thank you.
Thanks for your words of collaboration. Lots to do still together. Now we hand over to EBRD, Miss Ireda now let me say this properly. My apologies. I should know this one. Chikachi, Principal of the Agribusiness Advisory European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Welcome.
Many thanks, Catherine, and colleagues for having invited the EBRD to this meeting. I'm sitting here for our Director of Agribusiness, Natalia Shukova, who actually was in the previous meeting with all of us. This week is very busy. We have annual meetings with the election of the new president, so we are looking forward for new leadership. I'm here to announce a bit in anticipation of next week, a big project that we are starting with the FAO. We just internally approved, and it will be released to the press soon, a 3 million package together with the FAO and the EBRD, especially for our COVID-19 response. It's a big milestone because it took us quite a few months to understand which would be the right priorities for all our countries of operation. And as you know, this region is really at the heart of the EBRD's work in our sector, in the agribusiness sector. I wanted to say that FAO provides and always have provided us with intellectual leadership. And in fact, the thinking of the response of such a difficult context, such as of COVID-19, came from a reflection of our two chief economists, so Maximo Torero and Beata Javorcic from our side wrote a piece that actually helped our management to focus on the activities that we believed that were more, let's say, short-term and long-term important in this context of COVID. So the package will have three, let's say, areas of work. The first one is more on markets and really looking at how we can, together with our partners, and this is, I really want to stress this, partnership is the key here, how we can expand further and provide country level technical assistance measure to enhance market transparency, ensure proper consultation and discussion with private sector regarding COVID-19 in order to limit unnecessary supply chain destruction in the agri-food sector, accelerate the transition of regional food system towards more resilient and sustainable models, including low carbon solution, more diversified production and suppliers, shorter value chain from post-COVID-19, and as well as limit imposition of restriction, be it trade restriction, that usually exacerbate tensions on international and domestic markets, so to prevent that this is considered again in these countries. So this is a bit on the macro side, and then the response is a very operational response. The objective is to support both countries of operation as well as companies in several key sectors and segments of the agribusiness value chain, and to build resilience not only in the short term, where we will be providing immediate technical assistance at the country level in a series of key value chain, but also to try to maintain the strategic and policy inputs to these countries to actually build back better, as Mr. Torero was saying in his presentation. So we are very excited that that we can start working together on these topics, and we really believe that we all have to join forces. This is really important. Alongside this package, the BRD will continue invest in these countries. In 2020, we already invested more than 700 million for COVID response in a solidarity package for companies, for beneficiaries, but more should be done at the level of business association, technical advisory, exchange of knowledge, and FAO has always been our best partner to do so. So we really look forward to implementation, and we look forward to create a dynamic partnership with actors that are relevant in these countries to actually join forces in a very important agenda. Thank you very much for inviting us and for all the interesting presentation that you put forward today. Thank you. Over to
Thank you. Always good to hear concrete collaboration coming through. And interestingly, on the agribusiness front, we're renewing our private sector partnership strategy. So that should be very interesting on how to attract private investment further into agribusiness. Okay, so now to the Green Climate Fund and Mr. Mark Dumas Johansson. He's the Forest and Land Use Specialist of the Green Climate Fund. Over to you. We're enjoying all of this, but time is running.
Thank you very much, Catherine, and dear Excellencies and dear colleagues. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be with you here today. We very much welcome this newly launched program from FAO and find it extremely important, given the global crisis that we are facing. We see many good entry points from what we're already doing and what we are planning to doing. We have currently recently launched a new readiness mechanism as part of our readiness program that aims to really support countries, primarily looking at the impact of COVID-19 and to further strategize on the opportunities for the country's climate change strategies and plans to be elaborated and validated by the countries. We also have the opportunity to support countries develop national strategies for green resilient recovery, and also to be adapted by the country, and finally to have the opportunity to support the development of concept notes with pre-feasibility studies up to 3 different concept notes per country. So we see this as one very rapid response that could be very much linked to the current launch program by FAO. And we of course also have our longer term responses to our funding proposals, where we always seek to find ways to support green recovery through diversification of livelihoods and job creation and creating investment opportunities. We are currently developing our sector guidance across our 8 result areas, with agriculture being one of them. And currently, we're going to launch a consultation process for some of these sector guidance documents, one of them being agriculture, being launched later this month. And I think this is a great opportunity for FAO, for countries and for partners to engage further in this process and to share your comments and your views on how we could improve these documents. The responses to COVID and a green recovery is very much embedded in these sector guidance documents. In particular for agriculture, the guidance document really looks at resilient agriculture, climate-informed advisory and risk management services, and transforming food systems. And I think in particular the latter one is really key here, where there's a lot of opportunities to work together. The intention of the sector guidance is to support countries and accredited entities identify paradigm-shifting interventions and turn them into very innovative proposals to submit to us. And so we really think that this is the turning point and really an opportunity to ensure very, very innovative proposals going forward. So I think this is a great opportunity to also link with your launch program and see how we can better collaborate and find ways of incorporating this in the sector guidance and in future funding proposals. We also have, as you may have noted, a relative small portfolio in Central Asia in the region, and of course we very much welcome that we can build that further together with you and partners and countries. And so we very much welcome any early ideas and of course concept notes and funding proposals, and very much welcome any kind of discussion that we can have at an early stage to form these new ideas. Thank you again for this opportunity, and we look forward to continue our collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you for those entry points, and very important, the formulation funds for good concept note design. So really appreciate those, and I'm sure our EU colleagues are noting for follow-up with you. Now to the Eurasian Development Bank and Ms. Agul Mohammed-Dieva, member of the Management Board, Managing Director, Head of the Directorate of Natural Resources and Agriculture. A warm welcome. We have Ms. Agul. or shall we move on just in case she's dropped off?
There is the microphone.
Yes.
Okay, all right, apologies. Good to see you.
Thank you, Katrin. Я хотела бы поблагодарить Владимира Олеговича Рахманина и его команду за предоставленную мне возможность участвовать в обсуждении глобальной программы ФАО сегодня. Все 7 направлений программы, на мой взгляд, очень важны, и меры, которые предлагает ФАО, окажут значительное влияние на урегулирование последствий критической ситуации, вызванной COVID-19. При этом многие мероприятия имеют, конечно же, постоянную реализацию, но я бы хотела отметить, что особо актуальными в период ограничений, вызванных COVID-19, является развитие направления Data for Decision Making. Решения, которые предлагает и внедряет ФАО, позволяют получать и своевременно анализировать информацию для принятия важных решений. В критических ситуациях, как мы знаем, правильные и своевременные решения всегда имеют очень ключевое значение. Также внедрение цифровых инициатив на всех этапах продовольственной цепочки являются очень актуальными в период карантина. Но я бы хотела отметить и обратить внимание на необходимость также поддержки и развития крупных предприятий, которые создают мультипликативный эффект в сельскохозяйственной отрасли и создают возможность для развития мелких фермеров. Евразийский банк развития оказывает поддержку таким предприятиям через финансирование новых инициатив и финансирование текущей деятельности. В частности, мы очень сильно поддержали всех текущих клиентов в период и в результате последствий COVID-19. Мы предоставили им льготные периоды, отменяли штрафные санкции, давали дополнительное финансирование и очень сильно поддержали их текущую деятельность, которая пострадала от карантина. Ябр также заинтересован в увеличении объемов инвестирования в сельскохозяйственную отрасль стран-участниц банка и, в частности, в реализацию интеграционных проектов на территории этих стран. С этой целью мы проводим в настоящее время тесную работу с ФАО по организации исследований в сельскохозяйственной отрасли стран-участниц банка с целью развития именно интеграционных проектов. И мы со своей стороны планируем продолжать такое сотрудничество и благодарим за это команду ФАО в Европе и Центральной Азии. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation and the breadth of things that are going on there. So the next person to speak is Miss Katarina Eriksson. She's the Project and Partnership Development Director at Tetra Laval Food and Development for Sweden, in Sweden. Thank you.
Thank you, Katrin, and thank you to FAO for inviting the private sector to share experience on COVID-19 response. I would like to briefly explain how our business addresses FAO's response plan and specifically the areas of economic inclusion and boosting of smallholder resilience. I see many synergies of working together in these areas. I will touch on 2 ways we respond to the COVID crisis. First, linking smallholders to the formal dairy value chain. And second, by addressing consumers' need for nutritious and safe food. Very briefly about us, the Tetra Laval Group, we address the whole value chain for milk, from grass to glass. And we have customers almost everywhere. De Laval supplies everything a dairy farmer needs, maybe with the exception of the cow. And Tetra Pak is a supplier to the food processing industry. And developed the aseptic technology already in the 1960s, which has made it possible to extend shelf life of milk. So without any additives, this UHT milk and other foods can be stored and transported without cooling for 6 to 12 months. A major challenge for the dairy sector globally is that 42% of the world's milk is produced by smallholder farmers. and they operate in the informal sector, and their milk is sold unprocessed directly to consumers. We have developed the Dairy Hub model through which we link smallholder farmers to our dairy customers' operations. We train extension officers who then train the farmers so that at farm level volumes and quality can improve. By supplying the dairy processor rather than the informal market, farmers are ensured a secure market and stable pricing for their milk, and therefore incomes improve. The pandemic has actually triggered farmers to change behavior faster than we expected. For example, in Albania, farmers are no longer able to travel to Tirana city with reused bottles filled with unprocessed milk, so they have started to deliver all their milk to a collection center. Some farmers have more than doubled milk production, and quality has also improved. During the pandemic, we have also seen how consumption patterns have changed. Home consumption of food has increased, while consumption in hotels and restaurants have decreased. And for months, children all around the world have been deprived of their school meals. UHT packages have proven to be ideal when school feeding programs have had to shift to take-home rations, and when social and food aid programs have had to increase distribution of food packages to vulnerable families. Globally, Tetra Pak's carton packages reach 66 million children in their schools in 56 countries. In the EU, many member countries supply UHT milk and juices through their social programs. In Russia, for example, Tetra Pak portion packages are used in school milk programs in around 20 regions. And when schools closed in March, many of the regions provided weekly food packages, including UHT milk and other essential foods, to compensate for the loss of school meals. For many years, we worked with FAO on school milk promotion, and we would be very happy to look at more collaboration with FAO also in dairy development. We have started small already by joining forces with FAO in Albania. We have started Dairy Hub projects with 2 dairy processors, and in one case, FAO has provided additional resources, including training of smallholders. We are also together with FAO looking at initiating a school milk pilot based on smallholder milk, processed and packed by our dairy processing customer. This project is building on many years of FAO support to the Albanian government in the planning of introduction of school food. It will eventually be a very nice example of how smallholder milk has gone from being sold unprocessed in used Coca-Cola bottles to being served in a safe portion pack to a child in school, contributing much needed nutrition. In conclusion, we are very interested in looking at collaborating more with FAO, developing value chains that lead to both economic inclusion and boosting of smallholder resilience. Thank you very much.
Always good to hear from the private sector and all your innovations for your own survival, let alone, you know, helping others in very basic needs such as school meals, etc. So thank you for that. And moving nicely then on to the Dutch Entrepreneurial Development Bank, talking of entrepreneurship, Mr. Bran Reinen, head of the Food and Agri-Water Division. Welcome to you.
Yes, thank you very much to FAO for inviting FMO to speak at this event. And welcome to everybody. Yes, my name is Bram Reinen. I'm heading the agribusiness for FMO in the Eastern Europe and Central Asia region. So Eastern Europe, Central Asia is for us one of the key areas for agribusiness. We have invested for more than $150 million in the region, in this sector alone this year for the first 9 months. So just to put that in perspective, that's actually more than the whole of 2019. And that's also because we want to support our clients during this COVID crisis. So what we see is that obviously agri-food chains have been disrupted at the start of this crisis. And the focus of FMO has very much been to support our clients in, let's say, overcoming this crisis by having special facilities and investments to help them secure the supply routes. That can be in various countries in the regions. Most noticeably, we have done investments in Ukraine, Moldova, and Turkey. And in addition, next to normal debt or mezzanine investments, we have provided several grants to our clients to help them provide the necessary sanitary measures in their companies to protect their workers. So that has been a special focus for our business this year. Now, if we look at the 6 focus areas for FAO and how does it relate to what we do in FMO and the agribusiness, we look very much in economic development and inclusion, as well as making sure that the trade flows keep on going and that the necessary exports are being made. Interesting to note as well is that these 5 focus areas of FAO very much relate to FMO's agribusiness strategy overall. We have 5 key areas within our strategy that have quite a bit of overlap with FAO as well. That's climate smart agriculture, agroforestry, value chain optimization, smallholder inclusion, and innovation and digitization. We believe by these focus areas, we can sustainably improve the supply chain in agribusiness. And that's where we look at when we do investments. And within our overall strategy, FAO is a crucial partner, both from a knowledge point of view, as well as conceptual, having to help us think let's say, our next investments, as well as where to effort our resources. So thank you very much for the invitations once more, and we look forward to continuing the partnership with FAO.
And a great partnership, since the food and agricultural sector is such known as a risky business. It's so good to have, investors and de-risking that investment for others. So really good to hear. Okay, so last but not least, really last but not least, because we are hearing from other important partners such as civil society and Mr. Yehan Temurcu, a member of, now I have to say I cannot pronounce the village here, I will let you do that, but whatever village you will say yourself, from the Ecological Living Collective and a member of the Yeleni Europe and Central Asia Food Sovereignty Network. So we look forward to hear that pronunciation on the village. Thank you and your input.
Well, thank you for the invitation. And actually, it's also difficult to pronounce for Turkish-speaking people. It's a long name. It's the Tahtacoğrancık Village Collective, shortly. And I'm here to talk on behalf of Yeleni Europe and Central Asia Food Sovereignty Network. And probably, if I'm not mistaken, I'm just the only one who represents primary food producers, smallholders, and CSOs here. But thank you for this opportunity. So I will try to reflect the views of small-scale food producers, including peasants, small-scale farmers, fishers, pastoralists, indigenous peoples, and other people working in rural areas. These people, despite the ever-increasing pressure and even hostility from the industrial food system, continue to feed their communities and the majority of the planet's population in sustainable ways. As such, they continue to feed our hopes for a decent future for our children. And these people, as well as wage workers in the food and agriculture sectors, have been gravely affected by confinement and lockdown measures during the pandemic, as were many socio-economically deprived groups in both rural and urban areas. Small-scale producers, rural communities, and indigenous peoples had been facing hard-hitting problems even before the COVID-19 crisis, including denied or restricted access to resources, public services and markets, as well as aggressive grabbing of their lands and resources and forced migration. And these problems only aggravated since the pandemic started. This forced shift to corporate-driven industrial modes of production and distribution had terrible impacts all around the globe. And it's now well documented that this system is too costly to the planet with its dependence on fossil fuels and synthetic chemicals, with its heavy exploitation of soil, water, genetic resources, and labor, as well as its health costs. We also know that the expansion of industrial animal farming into natural habitats is one of the key factors in zoonotic disease outbreaks. Hence, when thinking about responding to post-COVID emergencies, we should never forget that the profit-driven, exploitative industrial food system is the very source of crisis in food and agriculture. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel. What we need is to protect and support local resilient food systems and work together for a global transition in line with principles of agroecology and people's food sovereignty at every level. We, people who produce and feed the world in sustainable ways, have the knowledge and the skills to realize this systemic change. During the most acute days of the recent food crisis, many small-scale food producers quickly adapted to new conditions, continued to feed their communities with fresh, healthy, nutritious food, and also found creative solutions to connect directly with wider populations. Many cooperatives and food communities continue to function in conformity with safety measures. CSA groups and producers' organizations operated more actively than ever with their safe methods under pandemic conditions. People got self-organized to create solidarity funds for the most vulnerable. And when it comes to some of our inputs for the FAO response program for a systemic change, we see that the documents of the response program mention indeed many of the world's current problems related to food and agriculture, but often only the symptoms or effects without enough analytic depth or courage to look at the real roots. And as it stands now, the program also lacks modalities or guidelines for supporting the primary producers of food. It is to be seen if it will enable locally adapted mechanisms for supporting small-scale producers in collaboration with social movements and CSOs. And documents also mention the precarious situation of some rural populations with primarily informal economic activities. And the questions are, will the measures of humanitarian aid only serve to sustain the deprived and dependent conditions of these populations? Will they use arguments of employment only to include their labor or products in profit-driven formal economic sectors? Or will they secure and promote these populations' access to local resources, creating conditions for decent livelihoods, enhanced life qualities, and need-driven innovations? Is it not odd that agroecology is not mentioned even once in the documents? Will the program use the narrative of food systems transformation as a pretext to promote industrial agribusiness with huge external costs, sacrificing genuinely sustainable and resilient ecological systems and social structures? Or will it support rural communities and smallholders in much cheaper, easier to implement, and climate-friendly ways, respecting the rights of the people? And if the latter is chosen, social movements, CSOs, and people who are in the center of food production will be ready to support the processes of implementation in all possible ways. Actually, we have a list of more specific proposals regarding the response program, but I will have to skip them in this talk due to time constraints. Of course, we are ready to share them with the FAO Europe and Central Asia, and indeed with everyone. Finally, we want to invite FAO to intensify its efforts for a common policy on a systemic change in food systems, respecting the CFS consensus, and with closer collaboration with local communities, social movements, and CSOs included in the civil society mechanism. Thank you.
Thank you for those important and provocative points to our response plan, and we do welcome your specific proposals to take those up and review them. Indeed, two of the prongs of the response are indeed about economic inclusion and smallholder farmers, and as you say, really we need to make sure we put the producers at the heart. So this leaves me to say a great many thanks to each one of you. Incredibly rich discussion, and we look forward to follow up with you with concrete action in these important areas at a global, at a regional, and at a country level. So I now hand back to our regional representative, Mr. Vladimir Rachmanin, for his closing words, and just take this opportunity to thank you once again. And we all work hand in hand to scale up a food and agricultural response to COVID. Not simple, but together we can surely do it. Thanks.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you. Special thanks for keeping us almost on time. It's not an easy task, but it's really also very satisfying to see how many participants we have. And I would like to express our gratitude to all of you for not only participation, but the thoughts that you shared with us and the commitments that you took in order to join forces with us to promote sustainable agriculture in the time of pandemic and beyond. I will be very brief, and I want to mention once again that our region is very big and very diverse, but pandemic hit all of us, and we are all under the influence of this event, which today's discussion showed. We learned from your experiences today and shared our assessments. I'm very pleased to see so many government representatives, financial institutions, colleagues assisting us and promising to work together. UN, of course, United Nations colleagues, all of us. I very much appreciate, and I want to see more of private sector participants, which is also very important, definitely, especially now. I might inform you that FAO is finalizing the new strategy of working with private sector, which we want, which would help us to be more active in joining forces with the private sector. Based upon this discussion, we shall have more detailed plans and shall reach out in order to seek your support for next practical steps. I believe it is very important for FAO. We have, and you learned about our visions, our assessment, but it's very important to stay connected with the countries, with the farmers, with the governments in order to work together. We have very good experiences and very strong partners. European Union, the members of European Union. We heard from Germany, we heard from Russian Federation, which is a part of Eurasian Economic Commission. We heard from Turkey, big countries which can help to build a sustainable agriculture and to promote sustainable food systems. As was already mentioned today, on November 2-4, our region will have the regional conference, that is the highest governing body for the region, which will provide the platform for the ministers to discuss all the issues related to our work in the region. But I am absolutely sure that the issues related to response to COVID-19 will be also in the focus of this discussion and of the further practical steps. First time the Central Asian country, Republic of Uzbekistan, is hosting this conference, but unfortunately also first time we're having it in virtual format. But I believe that we shall have good chances to have a good discussion, and a very focused one. We'll do all what depends on us to do that. It is also very important for our region to join forces, to work together, to coordinate our efforts. And please be sure that FAO, our regional office, is with you. We will be following your advices, but we would also be knocking on the doors in order to promote the mandate of FAO as we see it, which is sustainable agriculture, fighting hunger in the world and in our region, and all other things that are related to the FAO activities in the region. Thank you all very much. Much appreciated. To be continued. All the best.
Thank you all. Goodbye. Wishing you a lovely day.
Thank you, Catherine. All the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Ciao, ciao.
Bye now. Айгул, спасибо вам большое. И спасибо большое всем русскоговорящим участникам.